My name is Sienna. I am 32 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale anniversary dinner at Atlanta's most exclusive restaurant to catch up. I thought we were finally turning a corner. But when the waiter approached our table, my mother looked me dead in the eye and ordered $190 butter poached lobsters for everyone except me. My sister Tiana laughed, her perfectly glossed lips curling upward as the waiter placed nothing but a basket of dry dinner rolls in front of my face. "You should have brought your own food," Tiana sneered. Mom leaned forward, adjusting her pearl necklace, and proudly proclaimed that since I only ran a little food delivery hustle, I should not expect the family to subsidize my expensive tastes. I simply looked at my stale bread, took a slow sip of my ice water, and smiled. "That is fine," I said quietly. Then as the waiter turned to leave, I slowly stood up. "Before I tell you how I brought my fake elite family crashing down in the middle of a five-star dining room, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who constantly underestimated your worth." Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, meant navigating a very specific and unforgiving social hierarchy. My parents, Valerie and Desmond, were entirely obsessed with projecting the ultimate image of Black excellence. They were pillars of our local church regulars at every high society charity gala and desperate to maintain their pristine reputation among the wealthy elite of the city. Inside our home, however, that polished facade hid a suffocating and emotionally bankrupt reality. I was the family scapegoat. I was the daughter who never quite fit their perfectly curated mold, the one who preferred quiet hard work over flashy public displays of wealth. Let us go back to the beginning of that evening at the Onyx Room. The Onyx Room was not just a restaurant. It was an institution in Atlanta. Getting a reservation took months of waiting unless you knew the exact right people or had the right kind of money to bribe the maitre d'. The interior was a masterpiece designed to intimidate and impress. It featured dark velvet booths, gold-plated light fixtures, and low ambient lighting specifically designed to make everyone inside look wealthy and untouchable. The air always smelled faintly of expensive truffles and roasted garlic. When I arrived, the host escorted me through the crowded main floor to a secluded private dining area near the back, reserved for their most important guests. My family was already seated when I walked in. My mother Valerie sat right at the head of the long table, wearing a silk emerald green dress that she probably spent a month of her salary on just for this occasion. Beside her sat my father Desmond in his custom-tailored charcoal suit, projecting the image of a successful and commanding patriarch. Across from them sat my older sister Tiana and her husband DeAndre. Tiana was 34 years old and the undisputed golden child of our family. She had done everything exactly the way my parents wanted. She attended the most prestigious historical Black college, joined the top-tier sorority, and married a man who talked a very big game about his financial investments. DeAndre was currently holding court at the table, loudly boasting about his new crypto wealth management firm. He wore a heavy diamond-encrusted watch that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers every single time he moved his wrist. I took my seat quietly, offering a polite and respectful greeting to everyone. My mother immediately looked me up and down, her eyes filled with thinly veiled disappointment and harsh judgment. She openly criticized my simple tailored black dress, telling me I should have put far more effort into my appearance for such an important family gathering. She said I looked like a secretary who had just gotten off a long shift. I did not argue with her. I had learned long ago that arguing with Valerie was a losing battle that only drained my energy. Instead, I just sat back and observed them. I noticed how DeAndre kept tugging at his collar nervously, despite his loud bragging and arrogant posture. I noticed how Tiana kept checking her reflection in her phone camera, completely obsessed with looking flawless for her social media followers. They were trying so incredibly hard to look like royalty, holding on to an image of extreme wealth and power. But I knew the actual truth behind their designer labels. The waiter approached our table holding a heavy leather-bound menu to his chest. He was a young man, impeccably dressed and highly attentive. He politely asked if we were ready to order for the evening. My father took charge, immediately speaking in his booming, authoritative voice that he used to command attention at church meetings. He ordered the absolute most expensive items on the menu, starting with rare vintage wine and premium imported appetizers. Then came the time for the main course. "We will have the chef's special butter poached Maine lobster," my mother announced loudly enough for all the neighboring tables to hear her expensive tastes. "Make that 4 orders. One for my husband, one for my beautiful daughter Tiana, one for my highly successful son-in-law DeAndre, and one for myself." The waiter nodded professionally, jotting down the massive order on his notepad. "And for the young lady," he asked, gesturing politely toward where I was sitting at the end of the table. My mother did not even look at me when she answered. "Oh, she is fine," Valerie said, waving her hand with ultimate dismissal. "She just runs a little food delivery hustle out in the suburbs. She does not have the palate or the budget for fine dining. Just bring her the complimentary bread basket. She can snack on that while we eat our meal." The waiter hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the blatant and public disrespect happening right in front of him. He looked at me with sympathetic eyes, waiting for me to correct her or order a proper meal for myself. But I caught his eye and gave him a very subtle shake of my head. "Just the bread, please," I said softly, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Tiana let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed in the private dining space. "Seriously, Sienna," she mocked, leaning over the table. "If you are struggling that much with your little delivery gig, you really should have eaten a sandwich before you came here. We are not a charity program." DeAndre chuckled deeply, shaking his head as he purposely adjusted his flashy watch for everyone to see. "You just have to grind harder, little sister," he said with a deeply condescending smirk. "Maybe one day you can sit at the big boy table and eat like us instead of begging for crumbs." I kept my face perfectly neutral. I absolutely refused to let them see the intense anger boiling just beneath the surface of my calm exterior. I simply poured myself a glass of iced water and watched them pat themselves on the back. They were so wildly confident in their superiority. They truly believed I was beneath them, simply because I chose to build a quiet, steady business instead of flashing fake designer labels on the internet. My parents had always valued shallow appearances over actual substance. 8 years ago, when it was time for me to go to college, my father Desmond secretly drained my entire college savings account. I used every single penny of my hard-earned money to pay for Tiana to have a lavish 500-guest wedding because he desperately wanted to impress his church friends and local business associates. When I found out and confronted him with tears in my eyes, he showed zero remorse. He coldly told me that Tiana needed to keep up appearances for her new high society husband and that I would just have to take out heavy student loans and figure life out by myself. I spent my entire 20s working grueling, back-breaking hours, paying off massive debt and building my life from absolute zero while they paraded around Atlanta acting like the flawless American dream family. The waiter returned to our table carrying massive, heavy silver platters. The mouth-watering smell of rich garlic butter, toasted herbs, and perfectly seasoned premium seafood filled the air around us. He carefully placed a steaming bright red lobster in front of my mother, my father, my sister, and my brother-in-law. The sheer size of the meals was ridiculous, a blatant and gluttonous display of wealth meant only to intimidate me. Then, with a deeply apologetic look in his eyes, the waiter placed a small woven basket holding 3 dried dinner rolls right in front of me. There was no butter. There were no side plates, just plain dry bread. My mother picked up her heavy silver fork and knife, cutting into the tender, expensive lobster meat. She let out an exaggerated, theatrical sigh of pleasure. "This is exactly what success tastes like," she announced, looking directly into my eyes. "You have to earn your place in this harsh world, Sienna. We are not going to coddle you just because you refuse to aim higher and do better for yourself." Tiana quickly snapped a photo of her luxurious plate for social media, purposely making sure my sad bread basket was cut completely out of the frame. "Hashtag blessed," she muttered while typing rapidly on her phone screen. "Hashtag black excellence." I picked up a dry roll and broke it in half, letting the crumbs fall onto the table. I did not eat it. I just held it in my hands, feeling the rough texture against my skin. I looked at my family gorging themselves on a meal they believed elevated their social status above mine. They thought they had finally put me in my rightful place. They thought this brutal public humiliation would finally break my independent spirit and make me beg for their financial support and emotional approval. But what my ignorant family did not know was that the little food delivery hustle they were constantly mocking and belittling was actually sterling provisions. Over the past 8 years, while they were busy posing for pictures, I had ruthlessly and quietly built a massive supply chain empire. I owned vast fleets of refrigerated trucks, massive distribution warehouses, and exclusive ironclad contracts with the absolute best commercial fisheries in the entire country. I supplied premium seafood and organic produce to every single major high-end restaurant on the East Coast, including this exact one. In fact, I was not just a supplier for them. I had recently acquired an 80% silent ownership stake in the Onyx Room itself. Every beautiful chandelier hanging above their heads, every plush velvet chair they were comfortably sitting on, every single piece of lobster they were currently chewing and swallowing was purchased with my money, shipped by my logistics company, and cooked in my own commercial kitchen. I watched DeAndre wipe melted butter from his chin, his fake diamond watch catching the light and blinding me for a second. I watched my parents acting like untouchable royalty in a kingdom that I secretly owned, lock, stock, and barrel. They had invited me here tonight not to catch up as a family, but to break me down mentally and emotionally. They had a specific hidden agenda, and the breadbasket was just the opening act of their cruel play. I knew exactly what was coming next. I knew they were hiding a desperate secret behind those expensive lobsters. I set the broken piece of bread down on the pristine white tablecloth. I smoothed my hands over my black dress and leaned back in my chair, getting comfortable. I decided to let them enjoy their meal for a few more minutes, letting their false sense of power and arrogance inflate their egos to the absolute maximum limit. The higher they flew into the clouds, the harder they were going to smash into the ground. I caught the eye of the general manager, who was standing near the back of the dining room watching our table nervously. He gave me a slight respectful nod, waiting patiently for my signal to intervene. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound and beautiful sense of calm wash over my entire body. The long, painful years of being the scapegoat, the years of financial struggle, and the years of emotional neglect were all culminating in this exact moment in time. I was no longer the frightened college student begging for her stolen tuition money back. I was no longer the forgotten daughter desperately seeking validation from parents who were utterly incapable of giving it. I was the master of this room, and they were just guests eating on my dime. My mother wiped her mouth with a cloth linen napkin and cleared her throat, signaling that the real purpose of this dinner was finally about to begin. She exchanged a knowing look with my father, who reached down into his expensive leather briefcase to pull out a stack of papers. The trap was officially being set. I simply smiled, waiting for them to play their hand. I was ready. Desmond patted the stack of papers resting next to his wine glass, but he did not speak right away. Instead, he deferred to DeAndre. In our family hierarchy, the men who projected the most wealth held the floor. DeAndre leaned back in his plush velvet chair, swirling a vintage Cabernet. Haim made a grand sweeping gesture with his left arm, ensuring the heavy diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist caught the ambient lighting of the restaurant. It has been an absolutely phenomenal quarter for Apex Holdings. DeAndre bragged, his voice carrying over the gentle hum of the dining room. My crypto wealth management firm is pulling in numbers that would make traditional bankers weep. We are talking decentralized assets, offshore accounts, and high-yield portfolios. I just closed a deal last week that secured our position as top players in the Atlanta financial sector. Tiana gazed at her husband with an expression of manufactured adoration. She reached over and tapped the face of his watch with her manicured fingernail. "Tell them about the gift you bought yourself, baby," she purred loudly. "You deserve it after carrying so much responsibility." DeAndre chuckled, a deep, arrogant sound. "Oh, this little thing. Just a custom Audemars Piguet. Sourced it straight from a private dealer in Geneva. Set me back about 80,000. But when you are managing millions, you have to look the part. Clients need to see that you understand luxury." I took a slow, quiet sip of my ice water. My eyes tracked the movement of the second hand on his supposedly $80,000 timepiece. Because I moved in circles with actual billionaires who owned authentic luxury goods, I knew exactly what to look for. The sweeping motion of the hand was jagged, not fluid. The placement of the paved diamonds around the bezel was slightly asymmetrical, catching the light in a cloudy, lackluster way. It was a replica. A cheap imitation likely purchased out of the trunk of a car or from a shady online vendor for a few $100s. But I kept my mouth shut. I let him weave his web of lies because every word he spoke was just another piece of evidence I would soon use against him. Tiana took her cue to take over the conversation, flipping her long, heavy hair over her shoulder. "That is the standard we live by now," she announced, slicing into a thick piece of lobster meat. "DeAndre and I just booked our winter trip to Aspen, and my country club membership was just renewed at the highest tier. The women in my circle are practically begging me to host the next charity gala. It is exhausting being so heavily in demand, but someone has to represent our community at the highest level." She turned her gaze toward me, her eyes scanning my simple black dress. Her lips curled into a condescending pout. "You know, Sienna, you could really learn a thing or two from my lifestyle. I could introduce you to my stylist. That dress you are wearing looks like something you picked off a clearance rack at a discount department store. You are at the Onyx Room, for heaven's sake. You should try to look like you belong here, instead of looking like you just finished scrubbing a commercial kitchen floor." My mother Valerie eagerly jumped into the conversation, sensing the perfect opportunity to strike. She dabbed her mouth with her linen napkin and sighed loudly. "I have told her the exact same thing, Tiana. But your sister has always insisted on taking the absolute lowest path available. It breaks my heart to see how she presents herself in public." Valerie looked at me with an expression of profound pity mixed with intense disgust. "We tried so hard to elevate you, Sienna. We gave you the exact same upbringing as Tiana. But you always rejected our standards. Just look at your educational choices." Tiana attended Spelman College. She walked the same halls as the most elite Black women in this country. She built a network of absolute excellence. And you chose to go to a massive faceless state school just to save a few pennies. My father Desmond shook his head, staring down at his plate. "It was an embarrassment," he grumbled. "All of our friends at the country club and the church were asking where our youngest daughter was going to college. We had to lie and say you wanted to stay close to home for personal reasons. We could not bear to tell them that you chose a discount education over a prestigious, historically Black college. You are a stain on the family pedigree, Sienna. You dragged our name down into the mud because you lacked the ambition to stand alongside the elite." The sheer audacity of their rewritten history was almost breathtaking. They spoke with such intense conviction that a stranger walking by would have believed I was a lazy, ungrateful child who actively rejected a life of privilege. I sat perfectly still, chewing a piece of the dry bread they had assigned to me. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I let their cruel words wash over me because responding with emotion was exactly what they wanted. They fed on my pain. But tonight, they were going to starve. As they continued to mock my state school education, my mind drifted back to the agonizing truth of what actually happened 8 years ago. I never wanted to go to a state school. In fact, I had worked tirelessly throughout high school, maintaining a perfect grade point average and participating in every extracurricular activity possible. I had received a highly coveted acceptance letter to one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I had been overjoyed. I had run into the living room waving the letter, feeling like all my late-night studying had finally paid off. But the celebration had been violently cut short. When I went to the bank the following week to transfer the funds from the college savings account my grandparents had started for me, the bank teller looked at me with extreme confusion. She told me the account was completely empty. I remembered the sheer panic, the absolute terror that gripped my chest as I drove back home. I confronted my father in his home office, demanding to know where my money had gone. Desmond had not even looked up from his paperwork. I had simply stated that Tiana was getting married to DeAndre, and that the family needed to throw a massive 500-guest wedding to secure their social standing in Atlanta. "Your sister is marrying into the financial elite," Desmond had told me, his voice devoid of any warmth or guilt. "She needs to project absolute perfection. The church expects a grand event. Our friends expect a lavish celebration. We needed the money to book the grand ballroom and hire the best caterers. You will just have to take out student loans and go to a state school. You are smart enough to figure it out. Tiana needs this more than you need a fancy degree." They had stolen my future to pay for a party. They had drained my entire safety net to buy ice sculptures, designer floral arrangements, and a custom couture wedding gown for the golden child. I was left with absolutely nothing. While Tiana was toasting champagne and bragging about her high society wedding, I was working 3 minimum-wage jobs just to afford textbooks and basic rent. I drove a beaten-up used car that broke down twice a month. I ate instant noodles and slept 4 hours a night while trying to keep my grades up. I built my entire business from the trunk of that broken-down car. I started by buying fresh produce directly from local farmers at dawn and driving it to small independent cafes before my morning classes began. I negotiated every single penny. I reinvested every dollar I made back into my hustle. I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my social life because I knew no one was ever coming to save me. My family had thrown me to the wolves so they could wear expensive suits and pretend to be royalty. And now here they were sitting in a restaurant I secretly owned, mocking me for the very poverty they had forced upon me. "Are you even listening to us, Sienna?" my mother snapped, bringing me back to the present moment. "You always do this. You zone out when we try to give you constructive criticism. It is incredibly disrespectful." "I am listening, Valerie," I said, keeping my tone completely flat and detached. I had stopped calling them mom and dad years ago, though they rarely noticed the subtle shift in my vocabulary. "I hear everything you are saying about excellence in pedigree and standards." DeAndre scoffed, taking another large bite of his lobster. "Hearing is not the same as understanding, little sister. You have to apply the knowledge. You have to want to elevate yourself out of the struggle. Look at me. I saw an opportunity in the financial markets and I seized it. Now I am managing portfolios that you cannot even comprehend." I looked at DeAndre, noticing a slight bead of sweat forming on his forehead. The restaurant was perfectly air-conditioned, but he was perspiring. It was the physical manifestation of a man drowning in his own lies. I knew the truth about his crypto wealth management firm. I knew it was nothing but a hollow shell designed to siphon money from vulnerable people. But it was not quite time to pull the trigger on his destruction. I needed to see how far my father was willing to go first. "Speaking of seizing opportunities," Desmond said, clearing his throat loudly. He wiped his hands on his napkin and pushed his empty plate aside. He pulled the thick stack of papers closer to the center of the table, right under the glowing light of the chandelier. The atmosphere at the table shifted instantly. The casual mockery and condescending insults evaporated, replaced by a sudden intense and predatory focus. Tiana sat up straighter, gripping her wineglass tightly. Valerie leaned forward, her eyes fixed directly on my face. The ambush was finally moving into its next phase. "Since we are on the topic of family supporting each other and elevating our status," Desmond began, his voice taking on that smooth, calculated tone he always used when he wanted something. "We need to discuss a very important business matter tonight. A matter that requires your immediate cooperation, Sienna." I kept my hands resting gently on my lap. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I stared right back into my father's eyes. I was ready to watch them cross the point of no return. Valerie clasped her hands tightly together, resting them elegantly on the pristine white tablecloth. Her entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. The harsh, sneering woman who had just mocked my state school education vanished completely. In her place sat a woman projecting an aura of sickeningly sweet maternal affection. She leaned toward me, her heavily contoured face softening into a mask of deep familial concern. "Sienna, sweetheart," Valerie cooed, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "You know how much we love you. We may be hard on you sometimes, but that is only because we see your potential. We want you to be part of the legacy this family is building. We want you to rise up and share in the absolute abundance that God is pouring into our lives right now." I remained silent, staring at the fake warmth radiating from her eyes. When Valerie used pet names, it meant she was about to ask for blood. Desmond tapped the heavy stack of legal documents resting beneath his fingertips. He cleared his throat, adjusting his posture to look like the benevolent patriarch, making a grand executive decision. "DeAndre is on the absolute verge of a historic breakthrough." My father explained, his tone serious and commanding. "His crypto wealth management firm has secured a massive international partnership, We are talking about foreign investors ready to pour tens of millions of dollars into his offshore portfolios. This deal is going to catapult our family into a completely different tax bracket. We will not just be rich, Sienna, we will be generationally wealthy. DeAndre nodded solemnly, smoothing his hands down the lapels of his custom suit jacket. He put on his best corporate face, the one he undoubtedly used to scam the elderly parishioners at my mother's church. It is a highly sensitive, time-sensitive acquisition, DeAndre interjected, using aggressive financial buzzwords to make his hollow scam sound legitimate. The foreign partners require a temporary liquidity bridge to finalize the smart contract protocols. It is a standard operational procedure in high-tier international finance. We just need to show immediate liquid capital to release the overseas funds. Once the funds are released, the return on investment will be astronomical. Tiana leaned across the table, her eyes wide with manufactured excitement. This is exactly what we mean when we talk about Black excellence, Sienna. We are building an empire. DeAndre is doing things that will put our family name in the history books. We are creating a dynasty, and we want to give you the rare opportunity to be on the ground floor of this massive success. I looked at the four of them, studying their desperate, greedy faces. They had orchestrated this entire expensive dinner not to celebrate an anniversary, but to corner me. I was the target of a highly coordinated financial shakedown. A temporary liquidity bridge, I repeated, keeping my voice devoid of any emotion. How much liquid capital exactly does this international acquisition require? Desmond smiled broadly, falsely believing that my question indicated a willingness to participate in their delusion. He slid the thick legal contract across the table. It stopped right next to my empty breadbasket. $300,000, my father stated flatly. It is a very small number in the grand scheme of things, practically pocket change compared to the millions DeAndre is about to bring in. I looked down at the contract and then back up at my father. And where exactly do you expect me to find $300,000? Valerie let out a bright, airy laugh as if I had just asked the most foolish question in the world. Oh, do not play coy with us, Sienna. We know you have been hoarding your money. We know you live in that modest little house in the suburbs, and you run your little food delivery business. You have absolutely zero overhead, no expensive clothes, no country club memberships, no luxury cars. You must have built up a decent amount of equity by living such a minimal lifestyle. Desmond tapped the contract again forcefully. The paperwork is already drawn up by my attorneys. All you have to do is sign it. It authorizes a collateralized loan. You will take out a second mortgage against your house and use your business assets as collateral to secure the $300,000. The bank has already pre-approved the loan based on the equity in your property. We just need your signature tonight, so the funds can be wired to DeAndre's holding account first thing Monday morning. They wanted me to mortgage my home. They wanted me to leverage the business I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears from the trunk of a broken-down car to fund my brother-in-law's fraudulent lifestyle. They were entirely willing to render me homeless and bankrupt just to keep up their pathetic charade of wealth. Let me make sure I understand this perfectly, I said slowly, enunciating every single syllable. You want me to risk my home and the business I built from scratch. You want me to hand over $300,000 to DeAndre for a crypto investment that I have never seen any actual financial disclosures for. You want me to risk everything I have so he can secure an international deal. It is not a risk. DeAndre snapped, his voice losing its polished corporate edge for a brief moment. It is a guaranteed return. I will pay off your little loan within 30 days, and I will even throw in a 20% bonus for your trouble. You should be thanking me on your hands and knees for letting you in on this deal. Tiana nodded vigorously, rolling her eyes at my hesitation. Exactly, Sienna. DeAndre is practically handing you free money. We are trying to pull you out of the gutter and give you a taste of real wealth. You should be grateful that we are even including you in family business at this level. I looked down at the contract resting on the pristine white tablecloth. I did not touch it. I did not even lean forward to read the fine print. I knew exactly what it was. It was a financial death warrant. I picked up my glass of ice water, took a long, deliberate sip, and set it back down. No, I said. The word hung in the air of the private dining room. It was a single quiet syllable, but it struck the table with the force of a physical blow. Desmond blinked, his thick eyebrows furrowing in deep confusion. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" "I said no," I repeated, keeping my voice completely calm and level. "I will not be signing your contract. I will not be mortgaging my home. I will not be leveraging my business. And I will certainly not be handing over $300,000 to DeAndre." The sickeningly sweet masks shattered instantly. The illusion of a loving, supportive family vanished, leaving nothing but raw, ugly entitlement. Tiana slammed her hands flat against the table, causing her wineglass to rattle dangerously. "Are you out of your mind?" she hissed, her face twisting into a mask of pure fury. "You are completely delusional. We are offering you the chance of a lifetime, and you are sitting there acting like you are better than us. You are just a bitter, jealous loser." "I am not jealous, Tiana," I replied smoothly. "I am just fiscally responsible. I do not hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars for vague promises about offshore crypto accounts." Valerie gasped, dramatically pressing a hand against her chest, as if she had been physically wounded by my refusal. "How dare you speak to your family this way?" she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch and echoing against the velvet walls. "After everything we have done for you, we invited you to this exclusive restaurant, we allowed you to sit at our table. We offered to elevate your pathetic little life, and this is how you repay us. With blatant disrespect and profound selfishness." "Selfishness," I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Refusing to bankrupt myself to fund DeAndre's lifestyle is not selfishness, Valerie, it is survival." DeAndre leaned aggressively across the table, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. His polished demeanor was entirely gone, replaced by the desperate, aggressive energy of a cornered scam artist. "You listen to me, you arrogant little nothing," he growled, his eyes narrowing into dark slits. "I am trying to uplift the wealth of this entire family. I am out here grinding every single day, making high-level moves that you cannot even fathom. I am building an empire that will take the Blackwood name to the absolute top of Atlanta high society. And you are dragging us down. You are an anchor of mediocrity wrapped around our necks." "You are not building an empire, DeAndre," I stated, my voice cutting through his aggressive posturing like a razor blade. "You are begging your wife's sister for a loan because you do not have any actual liquid capital of your own." Tiana let out a loud, dramatic scoff, tossing her hair back furiously. "You are so incredibly ignorant, Sienna. You know absolutely nothing about high finance. Rich people use leverage all the time. That is how real business is done. But of course you would not understand that because you are too busy driving a delivery van around the suburbs." Desmond slammed his fist heavily onto the table, making the expensive silverware clatter loudly. The veins in his neck bulged with barely contained rage. "I will not tolerate this insolence," my father roared, his booming voice dripping with absolute authority. "You are my daughter and you will do exactly as you are told. You owe this family. You owe us for the sacrifices we made to raise you. You will sign this contract right now, or so help me God. I will make you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." "I owe you nothing, Desmond," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "You made your choices 8 years ago when you stole my college fund. I built my life completely without you. You hold zero power over me." Valerie let out a harsh, cruel laugh that sounded like scraping metal. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest, with an expression of supreme, triumphant malice. She looked at Desmond, giving him a dark, knowing nod. They had anticipated my refusal. They had prepared a secondary line of attack. The demand for cash had failed, so they were instantly shifting to their most vicious weapon. They were about to cross a line so deeply unforgivable that it would permanently sever any remaining thread of biological obligation I held toward them. They were about to learn exactly why you should never back a quiet person into a corner. I watched them prepare their final psychological strike, entirely unaware that they were walking blindly into a trap I had spent years meticulously building just for them. Valerie leaned forward, the fake sweetness entirely gone from her eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating cruelty. She reached into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She did not slide it across the table like Desmond had with the loan contract. She held it up, dangling it in the air like a prize or a weapon. "You think you hold all the cards because you are sitting on a little bit of equity," Valerie sneered, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You think you can just say no to this family and walk away without any consequences. But you are forgetting something very important, Sienna. You are forgetting about the Macon property. The mention of Macon sent a sharp, involuntary jolt through my chest. The Macon property was not just a piece of land. It was my sanctuary. It was my late grandmother's historic estate, 40 acres of lush Georgia farmland, with a beautiful, sprawling Victorian farmhouse sitting right in the center. While my parents were busy parading Tiana around country clubs and forcing me into the shadows, my grandmother had been my only source of unconditional love. I spent every summer on that porch learning how to garden, learning how to cook, and listening to her stories about our ancestors who had worked that very soil. When she passed away 2 years ago, it shattered my heart. She had explicitly left the entire estate to me in her will, knowing that my parents would only see it as a dollar sign to be liquidated. What about Macon? I asked, my voice tight. Desmond smiled a dark, triumphant smile. Your grandmother was a sweet old woman, but she was entirely incompetent when it came to legal paperwork. Her lawyer made a minor clerical error in the filing of the deed transfer. Just a tiny mistake with the property boundaries and the date of execution. But in the eyes of the Georgia State Court, a mistake is a mistake. Valerie tapped her manicured fingernails against the manila envelope. We hired the best probate litigators in Atlanta, she boasted proudly, as if stealing from her own deceased mother and her daughter was an achievement to be celebrated. They filed an injunction last month. The inheritance is completely frozen. You do not own that land, Sienna. The estate is locked in probate, and as her next of kin, Desmond and I have been appointed as the primary executors of the disputed assets. Tiana let out a loud, mocking laugh, clapping her hands together. Oh, the look on your face right now is absolutely priceless, she crowed. You really thought you outsmarted everyone. You thought you could just hide away in your little suburban house and keep Grandma's estate all to yourself, while DeAndre and I are out here building a real empire. Now who has the power? DeAndre smirked, leaning his elbows on the table. This is how the real world works, little sister. You have to play ball with the big dogs if you want to keep your toys. You sign the loan documents today, we get our $300,000, and maybe your parents will tell their lawyers to back off. It is a simple transaction. Valerie leaned in closer, her voice dripping with sheer malice. Let me make this perfectly clear for you, Sienna. You have exactly 48 hours to sign that loan contract and secure the funds for DeAndre. If that money is not sitting in his holding account by Monday morning, Desmond and I are signing a commercial development deal. We already have a buyer lined up. A corporate retail developer who wants to flatten that entire property and turn it into a strip mall. They are bringing the bulldozers onto the lot on Monday afternoon. They are going to tear down that old creaky farmhouse. They are going to pave over her beautiful little rose gardens. They are going to completely erase every single memory you have of that place. Desmond nodded in agreement, slicing another piece of lobster as if they had just discussed the weather. The commercial developer is offering top dollar, he added casually. It is a highly lucrative deal that will benefit the family tremendously. We will use the profits to expand DeAndre's crypto firm and finally get Tiana that vacation home in Aspen she has been wanting. Of course, if you cooperate and fund the liquidity bridge tonight, we might be persuaded to let you keep the farmhouse. The choice is entirely up to you. They sat back in their chairs, a united front of pure greed and cruelty. They looked at me with smug, expectant faces. They were absolutely certain they had won. They had found my ultimate vulnerability. They knew how much I cherished my grandmother's memory. They knew that the Macon estate was the only place in the world where I had ever felt safe and loved. They expected me to break. They expected the stoic, quiet daughter to finally crack under the immense psychological pressure. They expected tears. They expected me to start begging. They expected me to reach across the table, grab the loan contract, and sign my financial ruin just to save the last piece of my grandmother's legacy. Tiana even pulled her phone out again, likely preparing to secretly record my emotional breakdown to share with her friends in their private group chats. They wanted to humiliate me thoroughly, breaking my spirit until I was nothing but a compliant tool for their financial gain. I looked at the manila envelope in my mother's hand. I looked at the loan contract resting near my father's plate. I looked at DeAndre's fake diamond watch and Tiana's arrogant, expectant smirk. The air in the private dining room suddenly felt incredibly still. The faint jazz music playing through the restaurant's hidden speakers seemed to fade away into absolute nothingness. The clinking of silverware from the main dining floor became a distant, muffled hum. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice to scream at them. I did not beg for mercy or plead for my grandmother's memory. Instead, I reached up and carefully unpinned the white linen napkin from my lap. I folded it with slow, deliberate precision. I aligned the corners perfectly, smoothing out the fabric with the palm of my hand. I placed the folded napkin gently on the table right next to the basket of dry, untouched bread they had ordered for me. I lifted my head and looked directly into my mother's eyes. My expression was entirely devoid of any emotion. The calm I felt was not the calm of defeat. It was the absolute freezing cold stillness of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. The sudden shift in my demeanor was palpable. The smug satisfaction on Valerie's face began to falter, replaced by a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of uncertainty. Desmond stopped chewing his food, his knife hovering over his plate. Tiana slowly lowered her phone, her brow furrowing in confusion. They had launched their most devastating nuclear strike, and I had not even blinked. "You think you are going to bulldoze the Macon property?" I said, my voice dropping to a soft, chilling register that forced them all to lean in just to hear me. "We are not making empty threats, Sienna," Valerie snapped, trying to regain her authoritative posture though her voice shook slightly. "The developers are on standby. The contracts are drawn up. We will destroy that house and everything in it if you do not comply with your father's demands right now." "You are remarkably confident for people who have absolutely no idea what is actually happening around them," I stated, leaning back in my chair and resting my hands on the table. DeAndre scoffed loudly, trying to break the tension that was rapidly thickening in the room. "Look at her trying to play tough," he sneered, pointing a finger at me. "You have no leverage here, Sienna. You are completely outmatched. You are a small-time delivery driver trying to play chess against high-level executives. Just sign the paper and save yourself the embarrassment." I turned my gaze to DeAndre. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "A high-level executive," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air with dripping sarcasm. "Is that what you call yourself, DeAndre? A high-level executive closing massive international deals?" "I manage millions," he barked, his face flushing with defensive anger. "I am facilitating global wealth transfers while you are hauling boxes of fish." "Are you really?" I challenged, tilting my head slightly. "Because from where I am sitting, it looks an awful lot like you are desperately begging your sister-in-law to take out a second mortgage just so you can cover up a massive, catastrophic financial crime." The word crime hit the table like a live grenade. Desmond's eyes went wide. Valerie gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Tiana slammed her hands on the table again, but this time it was not out of arrogance. It was out of sheer panic. "How dare you accuse my husband of a crime?" Tiana screeched, her voice cracking. "He is a licensed wealth manager. He is a respected figure in the community." I did not break eye contact with DeAndre. I watched the blood drain entirely from his face. I watched the swagger and the arrogance evaporate, leaving behind the terrified, sweaty reality of a cornered fraud. "You really should have done your research before you tried to extort me," I said quietly, my words slicing through their manufactured reality. "You brought me here to ambush me. You thought you could use my grandmother's memory to force me into funding your scam, but you made one massive fatal miscalculation." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, forcing them to sit in the suffocating dread of the unknown. "I stopped being the victim in this family a very long time ago," I continued. "You brought your little loan contract and your probate threats to a gunfight, and now I am going to show you exactly what happens when you try to burn down my grandmother's legacy to fund a lie." The utter certainty in my voice paralyzed them. They were staring at me as if they were looking at a complete stranger. The submissive, quiet scapegoat they had invited to dinner to bully and exploit was gone. They had demanded my submission, but they had awakened an empire instead. I kept my eyes locked on DeAndre. The false confidence had completely drained from his face, leaving behind a pale mask of sheer terror. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight collar. Is the $300,000 really to bridge an international crypto deal? DeAndre, I asked, my voice echoing with crystal clear precision across the private dining room. Or is it to pay back the elderly parishioners at Mom's church who are currently waking up to realize their entire life savings and retirement funds have completely vanished? The heavy silver fork slipped from DeAndre's trembling fingers. It hit his porcelain plate with a sharp, piercing clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. His jaw went slack. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff in the dark. He opened his mouth to formulate a response, but absolutely no sound came out. "What on earth are you talking about?" Valerie demanded, her voice faltering as she looked rapidly between me and her son-in-law. DeAndre manages institutional wealth. He manages a scam, I stated coldly, refusing to let him breathe. I know exactly what Apex Holdings is, DeAndre. It is not an exclusive wealth management firm. It is a completely unregistered Ponzi scheme. You have been targeting the most vulnerable people in our own community, people who trust Desmond and Valerie. You sat in the front pews of their church, promising guaranteed high-yield returns to widows and retirees. You took their hard-earned pension money and you funneled it directly into your own personal checking accounts to fund this pathetic illusion of a high society lifestyle. DeAndre gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. You have absolutely no idea what you are saying, he stammered, his voice pitching higher than normal. That is defamation. I can sue you for defamation. You cannot sue anyone with frozen assets, I replied smoothly, leaning forward to rest my arms on the pristine tablecloth. Let us talk about that luxury lifestyle of yours, shall we? Your custom-tailored wardrobe is heavily financed across 5 different high-interest credit cards, all of which are currently maxed out and defaulting. And that gorgeous Porsche Panamera you parked at the valet tonight. It is exactly 3 months behind on payments. It is actively listed for immediate repossession. The bank has been hunting for that car all week. I imagine you drove it here tonight, hoping to hide it in the secure VIP parking lot so the repo men could not hook it to a tow truck while you ate your lobster. Desmond slammed his hand flat against the table, sending a shockwave through the glassware. "Shut your mouth right now!" my father roared, his booming voice cracking with pure, frantic outrage. "How dare you invent such disgusting, malicious lies about your own brother-in-law? DeAndre is a brilliant financial mind. He is highly respected. I was just featured in the Atlanta Business Chronicle as a rising star." "He paid for that feature, Desmond." I shot back, my tone unwavering. "It was a sponsored advertorial. He bought a 2-page spread designed specifically to lure in more unsuspecting victims from your exclusive country club. He needed fresh cash to pay off the early investors who were starting to ask questions about their missing dividends. That is why he needs the $300,000 from me tonight. He is drowning, and the water is rising fast." "Lies!" Valerie shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my face. Her perfectly powdered features were contorted with ugly, desperate denial. She could not accept the truth because accepting the truth meant her entire social standing was a complete fraud. You sit there festering in your own bitter jealousy because you are 32 years old, unmarried and struggling to keep your head above water. You cannot stand to look at Tiana and DeAndre because they represent the exact black excellence that you completely failed to achieve. Black excellence, I repeated, letting a dry, humorless laugh escape my lips. Is that what we are calling grand larceny these days, Valerie? Is stealing from the elderly the new standard for our family pedigree? You are trying to destroy a successful black man just because your own life is a miserable, lonely failure. Desmond growled, his chest heaving as he doubled down on his delusion. He was a man who had built his entire identity on how others perceived his family. To admit that his golden son-in-law was a common thief would absolutely destroy him in the eyes of his peers. He preferred the comforting lie over the devastating truth. You have always been jealous of Since you were little girls, you wanted what she had. Now you are fabricating these psychotic stories to ruin her anniversary dinner because you have nothing of your own. I am not fabricating a single thing, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm register. I have the financial records. I have the tracing data showing exactly how he moved the stolen church funds through shell companies to pay for your daughter's designer handbags. You want to pretend everything is perfect because you value the applause of strangers more than you value basic integrity. But reality is sitting right next to you, sweating through his expensive suit. Tiana could no longer contain herself. Her perfectly curated facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. She pushed her chair back violently, causing the heavy wood to scrape harshly against the polished marble floor. She stood up, grabbing her crystal wine glass filled to the brim with expensive vintage red wine. Her hand shook with a rage so visceral it made her look completely unhinged. "You jealous, miserable creature!" Tiana screamed, her voice echoing loudly out into the main dining room. "You are just a pathetic little loser who wants to drag everyone down into the dirt with you. DeAndre provides for me. He treats me like a queen. You are just a bitter spinster making up lies, because no man will ever look at you the way he looks at me." She raised the wine glass, her eyes wide and manic, ready to hurl the dark red liquid directly into my face. She wanted to physically humiliate me. She wanted to ruin my dress and force me to flee the restaurant in tears. It was the ultimate mean girl tactic, a desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative that was rapidly slipping through her fingers. Valerie did not stop her. Desmond did not intervene. They watched with eager anticipation, hoping Tiana would deliver the punishing blow they believed I so richly deserved. They wanted to see me drenched and defeated. But I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands to protect my face. I just stared right back at her, daring her to make the biggest mistake of her life. "Throw it, Tiana," I challenged, my voice echoing with an icy, unshakable authority. "Throw that wine and see exactly what happens to you next. Let us see how your high society friends react when you are dragged out of the Onyx room in handcuffs for assault." Tiana hesitated, her arm suspended in the air. Her chest heaved rapidly as she calculated the risk. She wanted to destroy me, but she was terrified of causing a genuine public scandal. Her entire life revolved around projecting absolute perfection. Throwing a drink in a five-star restaurant would ruin her carefully cultivated image permanently. "You are a liar," Tiana hissed, lowering the glass just slightly but refusing to sit down. "You are just trying to break us up because you are miserable. DeAndre is a legitimate broker. You are just trying to distract from the fact that Dad told you to mortgage your pathetic little life to help the family." DeAndre finally found his voice, though it was shaky and weak. "She is crazy, Tiana," he mumbled, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his napkin. "She is just making things up to get out of helping the family. I am handling everything. The deals are solid, she is just a hater." "If the deals are so solid, DeAndre, why is your bank account overdrawn by $12,000? I countered, immediately refusing to give him an inch of breathing room. "Why are there 3 different legal notices filed against your LLC in the Fulton County Courthouse this morning? You are not a king building an empire. You are a desperate man holding a lit match in a room full of gasoline." Desmond slammed his fist on the table again, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. The aggressive sound drew even more attention from the outside tables. The invisible barrier between our private dining area and the rest of the elite restaurant was completely gone. Wealthy patrons were turning in their seats, pausing their own lavish dinners to watch the highly polished Black family self-destruct in real time. "I have heard enough of this garbage," my father roared, pointing a trembling finger at the entryway. "I will not sit here and allow you to slander this family. I will not allow you to disrespect the man who provides for your sister. We brought you here out of the goodness of our hearts. We tried to give you a chance to prove your worth to this family. But you are rotten to the core, Sienna. You are completely toxic." Valerie stood up next, joining her golden daughter in solidarity. She smoothed down the front of her emerald green silk dress, projecting a false air of righteous indignation. "You are going to apologize right now," my mother demanded, her eyes flashing with pure venom. "You are going to apologize to DeAndre, you are going to apologize to Tiana, and then you are going to sign that contract. If you do not, I swear to God, I will make sure every single person in this city knows exactly how ungrateful and mentally unstable you truly are." They were still trying to use intimidation. They still firmly believed they held the high ground. They thought that if they yelled loud enough, if they threatened my reputation severely enough, I would eventually crack and submit to their will. They were completely blind to the trap closing tightly around them. They were so deeply entrenched in their own delusion of superiority that they failed to realize they were bleeding out on the floor. I am not apologizing to anyone, I said, slowly rising from my chair to stand at my full height. I looked down at the four of them, matching their aggression with absolute chilling composure. And I am definitely not signing your fraudulent contract. Tiana let out a loud, dramatic shriek of frustration. Then get out, she yelled, pointing her manicured finger toward the exit. Get out of our sight. You do not belong here. You never belonged here. Desmond turned his head, searching frantically for the restaurant staff. He raised his hand, snapping his fingers aggressively in the air. Waiter! My father barked, his voice echoing with entitled fury. Get the manager over here immediately. We need this woman removed from our table. I stood my ground, smoothing my hands down the front of my dress. I was not going anywhere. The real show was only just beginning. Tiana let out another high-pitched shriek that shattered the sophisticated ambiance of the Onyx room completely. Her voice cut through the soft jazz music and the clinking of expensive crystal glasses like a jagged knife. The few tables that had previously been trying to politely ignore our private dining section were now openly staring. Wealthy politicians, local celebrities, and high-powered corporate executives turned in their plush velvet booths to witness the spectacle of Atlanta's supposedly perfect black elite family having a full-blown meltdown over their butter-poached lobsters. Tiana waved her arms frantically, her heavy gold bracelets clanking together with an aggressive metallic sound. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me, as if I were a wild animal that had just wandered into her pristine sanctuary. You are completely insane, Tiana screamed, her face contorted with an ugly, furious entitlement. You come in here dressed like a peasant and you have the audacity to disrespect my husband. You are just trying to ruin my anniversary because you have absolutely nothing going for you. Look at you. You are a joke. Everyone in this room knows you are a total joke. Desmond was hyperventilating. His eyes darted frantically around the room, taking in the judging stares of his elite peers. He recognized a prominent city councilman sitting 2 tables away. He saw the wealthy real estate developers he played golf with at the country club watching his family behave like absolute fools. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling into dust right in front of his eyes, and he could not handle the public humiliation. Lower your voice, Tiana, my father hissed, grabbing her wrist and yanking her back down into her velvet chair. But his anger was directed entirely at me. He leaned across the table, his face turning a dark mottled purple as the veins in his neck bulged dangerously. He lowered his voice to a menacing guttural growl, hoping to contain the damage. Look at what you have done, Sienna. You are embarrassing us in front of the entire city. I command you to pick up your purse and walk out that door right this second. If you leave now, we might be able to salvage this evening and protect our reputation. Get out of my sight before I do something I deeply regret. I slowly sat back down in my chair, crossing my legs elegantly under the table. I reached for my heavy crystal glass filled with ice water. The condensation was cold and grounding against my fingertips. I brought the glass to my lips and took a long, refreshing sip. I swallowed quietly, enjoying the absolute stillness in my own heart, while a hurricane ripped through the rest of my family. I smoothed out the fabric of my simple black dress, ensuring I looked the exact opposite of their chaotic, frantic energy. I am not leaving Desmond, I said softly, placing the glass back onto the pristine white tablecloth. I am actually quite comfortable right here. Valerie slammed her hands onto the table, causing her expensive silverware to bounce against the porcelain plates. Her eyes were wide and frantic. She realized that trying to quietly intimidate me was a massive failure. She needed an entirely new tactic. She needed to change the narrative before the harsh whispers of the other high society diners destroyed her social standing forever. She needed to turn me into the villain and herself into the tragic, long-suffering victim. She stood up abruptly, smoothing down her emerald green silk dress with rapid, nervous movements. She raised her hand high into the air, snapping her fingers with an aggressive, desperate authority that demanded immediate attention from the restaurant staff. A young waiter rushed over instantly, his eyes wide with profound alarm. He had been assigned to our table, but had clearly retreated to the edges of the dining room when the screaming began. He clutched his silver serving tray tightly against his chest, looking terrified of the wealthy, angry woman standing before him. "Yes, ma'am," the waiter stammered, glancing nervously at the untouched bread basket sitting in front of me. "How can I assist you this evening?" Valerie put on her absolute best theatrical performance. She placed a hand over her heart, feigning extreme emotional distress. Her voice trembled, perfectly mimicking the tone of a deeply concerned and exhausted mother who had reached her breaking point. "We need the general manager immediately," Valerie demanded, her voice carrying loudly across the room to ensure the neighboring tables could hear her fabricated story. "This young woman sitting here is my daughter, but I am afraid she is experiencing a severe mental health crisis. She has stopped taking her prescribed medication, and she is completely unstable. She forced her way into our private family dinner tonight, and now she is becoming highly aggressive and highly delusional. We simply cannot control her." Tiana immediately caught on to the vicious strategy. She nodded vigorously, dabbing at her dry eyes with her cloth napkin, as if she were wiping away genuine tears. "She is scaring us," Tiana added, her voice quivering with fake vulnerability. "She is making up wild stories and threatening my husband. We brought her here out of charity, hoping a nice hot meal would calm her down, but she is completely out of control. She is having a psychotic break." DeAndre sat silently in his chair, staring down at his half-eaten lobster. He was the only one at the table who seemed to understand that my threats were not empty delusions. He was still sweating profusely, his fake diamond watch catching the light as his hands trembled against his thighs. He knew I had named the exact county courthouse where his legal notices were currently filed. I knew I had identified the specific details of his fraudulent crypto scheme, but he was far too cowardly to stop Valerie and Tiana from pushing this fake narrative. He desperately hoped that if I was thrown out of the restaurant by security, he could easily convince Desmond and Valerie that I was just a crazy person spouting nonsense. He needed me physically removed from the premises so he could secure the $300,000 loan contract before Monday morning. Valerie turned her fierce attention back to the terrified waiter. "She is also refusing to pay for her portion of the table." My mother lied smoothly, escalating the situation to force the restaurant staff to take immediate legal action. "She ordered expensive items to spite us, and now she is trying to walk out on the bill. She is a danger and a liability to your fine establishment. I need you to bring the general manager here right now, and I want professional security to escort her out of the building. She needs to be removed from the premises immediately before she becomes physically violent toward the other guests." The young waiter swallowed hard, nodding his head quickly in submission. "Right away, ma'am," he whispered. He turned and practically sprinted toward the front of the restaurant to find his superiors and alert the security team. The trap was officially set. Valerie and Tiana sat back down, exchanging a brief, triumphant look across the table. They were incredibly proud of their quick thinking and their malicious social maneuvering. They had successfully flipped the script. In their minds, they had just secured their pristine social standing in the eyes of Atlanta's elite. The wealthy onlookers would simply pity them for having to deal with such a tragic, mentally ill relative. The profound embarrassment of the screaming match would be completely washed away by a wave of sympathetic high society gossip. I did not defend myself to the surrounding tables. I did not yell that Valerie was a pathological liar. I did not try to convince anyone in the dining room of my sanity or my innocence. I simply sat there watching my family bathe in the toxic glow of their false victory. The air in the room was thick with heavy anticipation. The soft jazz music played on, providing a surreal, soothing soundtrack to the brutal psychological warfare happening at our table. I looked at the loan contract still resting near Desmond's plate, $300,000. They were willing to have their own flesh and blood forcefully dragged out of a public space by armed security guards, just to protect a scam artist. They were entirely willing to label me clinically insane and financially destitute just to save their own fragile egos. I felt a profound sense of absolute closure in that moment. Any lingering shred of familial obligation, any tiny fragment of hope that they could be redeemed or reasoned with evaporated completely from my soul. I was entirely free from them. I just needed to deliver the final killing blow. Desmond leaned across the table again, pointing a stiff, rigid finger directly at my chest. You brought this on yourself, Sienna, he hissed, his voice low and dripping with venomous satisfaction. You could have just signed the paper. You could have just been a supportive sister for once in your miserable life. But you had to act like an arrogant fool. When security gets here, you are going to walk out quietly. Do not make a scene. Do not embarrass us any further. You are going to go back to your pathetic little house in the suburbs, and you are going to think long and hard about what you have done tonight. Tiana smirked, swirling the last bit of vintage Cabernet in her crystal glass. You are probably going to end up in a psych ward by the end of the night, she taunted, her voice filled with cruel, absolute certainty. I will make sure Mom and Dad tell the doctors exactly how unhinged you have been acting. Enjoy your little food delivery hustle, Sienna. It is the only thing you are ever going to have. I am enjoying it very much, I replied softly, resting my hands comfortably on my lap, keeping my posture entirely relaxed, more than you could ever possibly comprehend. DeAndre finally spoke, his voice strained and noticeably quiet. Just leave, Sienna, he pleaded, running a shaking hand over his sweating face. Just get up and leave before this gets worse for you. You do not want the police involved. You do not want to go to jail over a family dinner. No, DeAndre, I said, smiling directly into his terrified eyes. I think the police are exactly who we need tonight. In fact, I think they are going to find this evening incredibly productive for their ongoing investigations. Valerie scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically for the benefit of the watching tables. She is completely gone, my mother muttered to Desmond, loud enough for everyone to hear. She is living in a total fantasy world. It is a tragedy, really, to see a mind break like this. The minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. The restaurant patrons had cautiously returned to their expensive meals, but they continued to cast frequent sideways glances at our table, waiting for the inevitable climax. The tension in the air peaked, becoming a suffocating heavy silence that wrapped around our booth. The four of them sat with smug satisfaction, their arms crossed, their heads held high in arrogant defiance. They were absolutely certain that the universe was about to bend to their will. They were waiting eagerly for the manager to arrive and drag me out into the humid Atlanta street like unwanted trash. They had absolutely no idea that they were sitting dead center in my kingdom, and the executioner was walking right toward them. The heavy oak double doors leading from the main dining room swung open with a commanding thud. A tall, impeccably dressed man in a tailored midnight blue suit stepped into our private dining section. This was Julian, the general manager of the Onyx Room. Julian was a man who moved with the quiet, lethal grace of someone who controlled the most exclusive social real estate in Atlanta. He was known for his ruthless ability to curate the dining experience, filtering out anyone who did not meet the exact standards of extreme wealth and power. Behind him, the young, terrified waiter trailed like a frightened shadow, clutching his silver tray tightly against his chest. Valerie saw Julian approaching, and her entire posture transformed instantly. She leaned back in her chair, placing one hand delicately against her pearl necklace, while using the other to dab at her perfectly dry eyes with a linen napkin. She was preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Tiana immediately followed her lead, slumping her shoulders and looking down at the table as if she had just been subjected to the most horrific emotional abuse imaginable. Desmond puffed out his chest, straightening his tie, ready to assert his dominance as the wealthy, protective patriarch of a victimized family. "Thank God you are here!" Valerie exclaimed, her voice trembling with manufactured relief as Julian reached the edge of our table. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, her tone dripping with absolute aristocratic disdain. "We are dealing with a severe emergency. This young woman sitting here has completely lost her mind. We tried to be charitable. We tried to bring her into a civilized environment to enjoy a nice family dinner, but her behavior has become absolutely ghetto and completely unacceptable for an establishment of this caliber." Tiana let out a loud theatrical sniffle. "She has been screaming and making up psychotic lies about my husband." Tiana whimpered, gesturing weakly toward DeAndre, who was currently staring at his plate like a man awaiting a death sentence. "We are paying members of high society. We spend thousands of dollars in your restaurant. We should not have to be subjected to this kind of unhinged aggression while trying to celebrate my anniversary. She clearly does not belong in a place like this. She is completely out of her depth, and she is taking her miserable failures out on us. Desmond slammed his hand on the table again, ensuring Julian gave him his full undivided attention. I demand that you call your security team this exact second. My father barked, his voice laced with heavy entitlement. She is refusing to pay her portion of the bill. She is threatening to ruin our social standing with her psychotic delusions. I want her physically escorted out the back service doors, so she does not disturb any more of your high-end clientele. We will of course cover the cost of her dry bread basket just to be rid of her. Julian stood perfectly still. His hands were clasped respectfully behind his back. His face was a masterclass in professional neutrality. He did not immediately signal for the security guards who were standing on standby near the velvet ropes of the private dining area. He did not reach for his radio earpiece to call the police. He simply listened to my family hurl their vicious classist insults with the calm, detached patience of a man who already knew the absolute truth. Valerie mistook his professional silence for hesitation. She scoffed loudly, offended that her demands were not being executed with immediate aggressive action. Did you hear what my husband just said to you? My mother snapped, her tone shifting from fake victimhood to sheer arrogant entitlement. I know the owner of this restaurant personally. I am very close friends with the upper management of the hospitality group that runs this building. If you do not remove this unhinged woman from our table right now, I will make a phone call and ensure you lose your job by tomorrow morning. Have her thrown out into the street where she belongs. I sat there watching my mother threaten a man I had personally hired and promoted just 6 months ago. It was almost poetic witnessing the sheer volume of their arrogance. They truly believed that speaking loudly and throwing around empty threats could bend reality to their will. They relied entirely on the assumption that service workers would automatically submit to anyone wearing designer clothing and projecting a nasty attitude. They thought money bought them immunity from consequence. The surrounding tables in the main dining room had gone completely silent. The wealthy patrons of Atlanta had stopped eating their expensive steaks and sipping their vintage wines. They were absolutely captivated by the brutal drama unfolding in the private section. I could see the city councilman whispering to his wife. I saw a prominent judge raising his eyebrows in disbelief. My family was so blinded by their desperate need to punish me that they failed to realize they were permanently destroying their own reputation in front of the exact people they spent their entire lives trying to impress. Well, Tiana demanded, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring at Julian. What are you waiting for? Call the guards and get her out of my sight. She is ruining my anniversary. Julian finally moved. He did not reach for his radio. He did not look at the security guards. He did not even acknowledge Valerie, Desmond, or Tiana. He stepped smoothly around the large circular table, walking with purposeful, measured steps, directly toward my chair. The young, terrified waiter scrambled out of his way, flattening his back against the velvet wall to avoid being caught in the crossfire. Julian stopped precisely 2 feet away from where I was sitting. He smoothed the front of his midnight blue suit jacket. Then, in front of my sneering mother, my demanding father, my arrogant sister, and my terrified brother-in-law, Julian bowed. It was not a small, casual nod. It was a deep, respectful 90-degree bow, usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or ultimate superiors. Ms. Sienna, Julian said, his voice rich, resonant, and carrying perfectly across the dead-silent dining room. I am so deeply sorry. I was completely unaware that you were dining with us tonight. We would have prepared the executive suite for you immediately. He stood up straight, keeping his focus entirely on my face, treating the rest of my family like invisible ghosts. Are these guests bothering you, Ms. Sienna? Would you like me to have them removed from your restaurant? The silence that crashed down onto our table was absolute. It was a physical heavy weight that sucked all the oxygen straight out of the room. It was the kind of deafening silence that happens right after a bomb detonates before the shockwave actually hits you. I watched the exact moment my family stopped functioning. Their brains simply could not process the data their eyes and ears were receiving. The general manager of the most exclusive restaurant in the city had just bowed to the daughter they had spent the entire evening treating like absolute garbage. He had just apologized to the woman they had labeled a broke, miserable failure. He had just asked if I wanted them removed from my restaurant. Valerie's jaw literally dropped open. Her mouth hung slack, her perfectly applied lipstick looking ridiculous against her pale, ghostly skin. She looked like she had just been physically struck by a speeding freight train. Her eyes darted wildly between Julian and me, searching desperately for any sign that this was an elaborate practical joke. But Julian's face was completely serious and my expression was colder than ice. Desmond sat frozen in his chair, his heavy hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. The commanding patriarchal aura he had projected all night shattered into a million tiny irrecoverable pieces. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, his mind scrambling to understand how the daughter he had robbed and discarded could possibly command such intense respect from the gatekeeper of Atlanta high society. Tiana looked as though she was having a genuine stroke. Her eyes were bugging out of her head, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. She looked down at her own expensive dress, and then looked over at my simple black outfit, suddenly realizing that true power did not need to scream for attention. True power sat quietly in the corner and let everyone else make fools of themselves. She opened her mouth to speak, to object, to demand an explanation, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She just let out a pathetic tiny squeaking noise before snapping her mouth shut again. DeAndre was in the worst shape of them all. He was practically vibrating with pure, unadulterated fear. He had already suspected that I knew too much about his fraudulent crypto scheme. But hearing the general manager refer to this highly exclusive multi-million-dollar establishment as my restaurant confirmed his absolute worst nightmare. He was not just dealing with an angry sister-in-law. I was sitting across the table from an apex predator who had the financial resources and the societal influence to bury him alive and salt the earth over his grave. I do not understand. Valerie finally managed to whisper, her voice stripped of all its previous arrogance and venom. She sounded small, frail, and utterly confused. She looked at Julian with pleading, desperate eyes. "Why are you talking to her like that? She is just a delivery driver. She does not have any money. She cannot even afford to pay for her own meal." Julian slowly turned his head to look at my mother. His expression was completely blank, devoid of any of the subservient customer service warmth he usually projected. He looked at her with the cold professional disdain reserved for people who had severely overstepped their boundaries. "Madam," Julian said, his voice sharp and cutting, "you are speaking to the majority shareholder of Crescent Hospitality Group. Ms. Sienna owns 80% of this establishment. You are currently sitting in her building eating food purchased by her corporate accounts and being served by her personal staff. I strongly suggest you moderate your tone when addressing the owner." The final word hung in the air like a guillotine blade dropping. Owner. The reality of my hidden wealth crashed down upon them, completely destroying the fragile illusions they had built their entire lives around. They had spent 8 long years treating me like a stepping stone, like a disposable asset they could exploit and discard whenever they pleased. They had invited me here tonight to break me down, to force me into signing away my home and my business to fund a scam. They thought they were holding all the cards. They thought they controlled the entire game. But I owned the casino. I slowly reached out and picked up my glass of ice water. I took a calm, deliberate sip, letting the freezing liquid soothe my throat. I looked at each of their horrified, terrified faces, taking immense satisfaction in the absolute destruction of their false reality. I had not shed a single tear. I had not raised my voice once. I had simply waited for them to dig their own graves as deep as they possibly could before I kicked the dirt back over their heads. "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice smooth and commanding. "These guests have indeed become quite a nuisance, but you do not need to call security just yet. I have a few more things to clarify with my family before they are permanently escorted off my property." Julian bowed his head once more, stepping backward into the shadows of the dining room, but remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. I slowly stood up from my chair. I took my time straightening the front of my simple black dress, the very same dress my mother had mocked just moments ago, calling it a clearance rack rag. I looked down at the 4 people sitting around the lavish table. They were completely paralyzed. Their arrogant posture had collapsed into a collective state of profound shock. You called my life a little food delivery hustle, I began. My voice was calm, but it carried the heavy weight of an undeniable absolute truth. I suppose from your incredibly limited perspective, it might look exactly like that. You see, when you cut me off and stole my college fund to pay for Tiana's wedding, I had to learn how to survive on my own. I started by delivering fresh produce out of the trunk of my beat-up car. I drove to local cafes at 4 in the morning before my shifts at the diner, but I did not stop there. I walked slowly behind my chair, gripping the velvet backrest. I built logistics networks. I acquired warehouses. I bought out failing distribution centers across 3 states. That little food delivery hustle is a corporate entity called Sterling Provisions. I own a dedicated fleet of over 200 refrigerated trucks. We hold exclusive ironclad contracts with the absolute best commercial fisheries and organic farms in the country. We supply premium seafood and high-grade ingredients to every single major luxury hotel and high-end restaurant on the entire East Coast. I am not driving a delivery van, Valerie. I own the entire supply chain. The blood drained completely from my mother's face. She looked at Desmond, seeking some kind of reassurance, but my father was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. And that brings us to where we are sitting tonight. I continued, making a broad, sweeping gesture toward the opulent private dining room around us. You thought it was an amazing stroke of luck that we got a last-minute reservation here. You thought you were flexing your elite status by bringing me into this exclusive building. You genuinely thought you were showing me a world I could never possibly access. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the pristine white tablecloth right next to my empty woven bread basket. I am the silent majority shareholder of Crescent Hospitality Group. I own the Onyx Room. I own the velvet chair you are sitting on, Desmond. I own the crystal glass you are drinking from, Tiana. And those $190 butter-poached lobsters you just shoved down your throats. I purchased them with my corporate funds. I shipped them on my private trucks. I cooked them in my commercial kitchen. You are quite literally eating out of the palm of my hand. The silence that followed my declaration was suffocating. The sheer magnitude of my hidden wealth hit them like a physical blow to the chest. I could see the gears turning frantically in their heads as they desperately tried to recalculate everything they knew about reality. The daughter they had designated as the family failure, the woman they had invited here to humiliate and extort, was actually a multimillionaire. I possessed a level of generational wealth that made DeAndre's fake crypto firm look like a plastic piggy bank. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely obliterated. Valerie was the first to break the heavy silence. The transformation was absolutely nauseating to witness. The vicious, arrogant sneer melted off her face entirely. Her features contorted into an expression of desperate fawning affection. She blinked rapidly, forcing tears of joy into her eyes. "Sienna, my beautiful baby girl," Valerie stammered, her voice shaking as she reached a trembling manicured hand across the table toward me. I pulled my hands back, instantly refusing to let her touch my skin. "Oh my goodness, Sienna, why did you not tell us? We had absolutely no idea you were carrying all of this massive success on your shoulders. We would have celebrated you. We would have thrown you a massive party. We are so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. You are a true testament to the excellence of this family." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed against the acoustic panels of the room. My mother had just pivoted from calling me a mentally unstable peasant to calling me her beautiful baby girl in less than 3 minutes. The sheer whiplash of her greed was astonishing. "Do not call me sweetheart," I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. "And do not dare try to take credit for my success. You did not build this empire. You actively tried to destroy me so Tiana could have an ice sculpture." Tiana was hyperventilating. Her chest heaved as she stared at the remnants of her expensive lobster. She looked at her husband DeAndre, who was still sweating profusely and staring blankly at the table. Then she looked back at me, her eyes wide with a volatile mixture of profound envy and absolute disbelief. "But you drive a regular car," Tiana whispered, her voice sounding hollow and incredibly weak. You live in a normal house in the suburbs. You do not wear designer clothes. Why would you hide all of this money? Why would you let us pay for things when you are this rich? This makes absolutely no sense. I did not hide it from the world, Tiana, I replied smoothly, maintaining my unshakable composure. I only hid it from you, because I knew exactly who you people were. I knew that the second you smelled money, you would swarm me like bloodthirsty vultures. I knew you would demand investments and handouts and luxury vacations. You only value human beings based on their net worth. If I had walked into your house wearing a Rolex and carrying a Birkin bag, you would have treated me like absolute royalty. But because I chose to live quietly, because I preferred peace over flashy public validation, you treated me like dirt. You showed me your true colors, and I let you dig your own graves. Desmond sat completely rigid. His patriarchal authority had been entirely stripped away. The man who had spent his entire life demanding respect and submission from his children was now sitting in a restaurant owned by the daughter he had robbed. He swallowed hard, trying to find a way to salvage his dignity and his fragile ego. Sienna, he began, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence. We are your parents. We made some difficult financial decisions in the past, but we did what we thought was best for the family as a whole. You have to understand the immense pressure we were under to maintain our standing in the community. I understand perfectly, Desmond, I said, staring directly into his frightened, defensive eyes. I understand that your public image was vastly more important than your daughter's future. You expected me to fail. You wanted me to fail so you could keep using me as the designated family scapegoat to make yourselves feel superior. You invited me here tonight to extort $300,000 from me. You threatened to bulldoze my grandmother's legacy. Valerie jumped back in, desperately trying to rewrite history to save herself from the burning wreckage of her own actions. The loan was just a test, Sienna. My mother lied smoothly, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. We were just testing your business acumen. We wanted to see if you had the courage to take a financial risk. We never would have actually touched your grandmother's land. We love you, Sienna. We are family. Family protects each other. Family does not hold a knife to their own child's throat to pay for a fraud, I countered, shutting down her pathetic manipulation instantly. You meant every single threat you made tonight, Valerie. You thought you held all the leverage. You thought you could force me into bankruptcy to save your golden son-in-law. DeAndre tried to salvage his position. He cleared his throat, attempting to put his corporate mask back on. He adjusted his collar and forced a weak, sickly smile onto his sweating face. Sienna, DeAndre said, trying to sound calm and rational. Since we are both operating at the executive level now, we should put this petty family drama behind us. We are both titans of industry. If you have this kind of liquid capital, we could partner up. My crypto firm and your logistics empire. We could merge our portfolios. We could completely dominate Atlanta. I looked at DeAndre with pure, unadulterated disgust. The sheer audacity of this man to try and pitch me a fraudulent investment immediately after attempting to extort me was almost fascinating. We are not peers, DeAndre, I stated flatly, refusing to give him a single inch of grace. I built a legitimate, tangible supply chain empire. You built an unregistered Ponzi scheme designed to steal retirement funds from the elderly. I am a titan of industry. You are a common street thief wearing a fake $80,000 watch. Do not ever speak to me as if we are on the same level. The psychological crushing of my family was now absolutely complete. They had no threats left to leverage. They had no social standing left to weaponize. Their entire reality had been perfectly inverted. The scapegoat they had invited to dinner to manipulate and extort had just revealed herself as the most powerful person in the room. They were completely trapped in my domain, entirely at my mercy. And I was fresh out of mercy. I turned my attention away from my hyperventilating mother and locked my eyes squarely on DeAndre. He was gripping his napkin so tightly that his knuckles looked ready to burst through his skin. The fake diamond watch on his wrist felt incredibly heavy now, a glaring symbol of his impending doom. He tried to swallow, but his mouth was clearly too dry. He looked like an animal caught in a snare, realizing that chewing off its own leg would not even be enough to escape the trap. You think you can just walk away from this, DeAndre? I asked, my voice carrying a lethal softness. You think you can scam the elderly members of my parents' church, funnel their retirement funds into your offshore accounts, and just keep upgrading your country club membership? You thought you were the smartest guy in every room you walked into. DeAndre raised a shaking hand, wiping the thick layer of sweat from his upper lip. Sienna, please, he begged. His voice was a pathetic, raspy whisper entirely devoid of his previous bravado. We can work this out. I have assets. I have deals pending. If you just give me a little bit of time, I can restructure the portfolios. I can make those people whole again. You are a businesswoman. You understand liquidity issues. Just give me 30 days. I gave you 6 months, DeAndre, I stated. He stared at me blankly, his mind unable to process my words. What do you mean you gave me 6 months? I have never asked you for money before tonight. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You never asked me directly, no, because you thought I was just a broke delivery driver. You thought you were playing in the major leagues. For the past 6 months, you have been desperately pitching your crypto wealth management portfolio to a venture capital firm called Vanguard Group. You sent them your ledgers. You sent them your client lists. You sent them detailed breakdowns of your offshore holding accounts and your projected returns. DeAndre gasped, his chest heaving as the oxygen left his lungs. Vanguard Group was his absolute holy grail. Tiana had been bragging about that specific venture capital firm to anyone who would listen for half a year. They believed Vanguard Group was going to inject $10 million into his fake company and finally make them legitimate billionaires. How do you know about Vanguard Group? DeAndre choked out, his eyes wide with a rapidly escalating horror. Because Vanguard Group is a subsidiary of Sterling Provisions. I explained, watching the devastating realization crush his spirit. It is a private equity branch I created to manage my excess capital. You spent 6 months begging my company for money. You submitted your completely fraudulent financial records to my personal team of forensic accountants. You handed over the exact names of every single church member you stole from. You gave us the routing numbers to the Cayman Island accounts where you hid their stolen pensions. Tiana let out a loud, gasping sound, pressing both hands over her mouth. Her perfect designer world was actively burning to the ground right in front of her. DeAndre! Tiana shrieked, her voice trembling with hysteria. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not send our financial records to her. DeAndre could not speak. He was completely paralyzed, staring at me with the hollow, vacant eyes of a dead man. He knew he had handed over every single piece of incriminating evidence required to put him behind bars for the rest of his natural life. He had gift-wrapped his own federal indictment and mailed it directly to the sister-in-law he had spent years ruthlessly mocking. I let you pitch your scam to my investigators for half a year. DeAndre. I continued, keeping my voice perfectly leveled and professional. I let you weave your web of lies and dig your hole so deep that you could never possibly climb out. My financial team spent the last 3 months working directly with the authorities to trace every single dime you stole from those innocent people. We built an airtight case while you were busy trying on custom suits and planning ski trips to Aspen. Desmond grabbed the edge of the table, his face contorted in sheer panic. Sienna, you cannot do this, my father pleaded, his booming voice reduced to a desperate, frantic whine. You are going to destroy the family name. Do you know what the community will say when they find out? Do you know what this will do to our reputation at the church? You have to stop this immediately. Call your accountants and tell them to bury the files. We will figure out a way to pay the money back quietly. We must protect our black excellence. Your excellence is a mirage, Desmond. I shot back, refusing to entertain his delusional demands. It is built on stolen money and shattered lives. You want me to cover up grand larceny to protect your fragile ego. You want me to let DeAndre get away with destroying the lives of the people who trusted you. That is never going to happen. I slowly raised my right hand and gave a sharp, deliberate signal to Julian, the general manager, who was still standing discreetly near the entrance of our private dining section. Julian nodded immediately. He reached out and pushed open the heavy oak double doors leading into the main dining room. The luxurious atmosphere of the Onyx Room was instantly shattered by the arrival of stark, harsh reality. Two men wearing immaculate dark suits and grim, unsmiling expressions stepped through the doorway. They moved with a synchronized, authoritative, heavy tread that instantly commanded the attention of every single wealthy patron in the restaurant. They were not wearing the uniform of local police or private security. They wore the unmistakable, sharp attire of federal investigators. A silver badge hung clearly visible from the belt of the lead agent, catching the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers. The main dining room erupted into a symphony of shocked gasps and frantic whispering. Atlanta politicians, corporate executives, and high society socialites craned their necks to watch the federal agents march directly toward our table. This was the ultimate social nightmare. A public arrest in the most exclusive dining establishment in the entire city. Valerie let out a high-pitched wail, burying her face in her hands. She knew her days of hosting charity galas and bragging at the country club were officially over. The shame would be permanently attached to her name. She would be forever known as the woman whose son-in-law stole from her own church congregation. The two federal agents bypassed my parents completely and flanked DeAndre. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, looked down at my brother-in-law. DeAndre Washington, the agent announced, his voice loud enough to carry across the hushed restaurant. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and the financial exploitation of the elderly. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. DeAndre did not move. He was frozen in a state of absolute catatonic shock. He stared straight ahead, his breathing shallow and rapid. He had spent his entire adult life projecting the image of an untouchable financial genius, and now he was being publicly dismantled in front of the exact elite crowd he so desperately craved validation from. I said stand up, the agent commanded, his tone leaving zero room for negotiation. He reached down, gripping DeAndre firmly by the arm and hauling him out of his plush velvet chair. The illusion broke. DeAndre stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly against the polished marble floor. The second agent grabbed his other arm swiftly, maneuvering DeAndre's hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly in the private dining space. It was the definitive, unmistakable sound of total ruin. Tiana completely lost her mind. The reality of her husband being hauled away in chains while her wealthy peers watched in horror was simply too much for her fragile, manufactured ego to process. She abandoned all pretense of high society elegance and threw a massive public tantrum. Get your hands off him! Tiana screamed, her voice tearing through the restaurant like a siren. She lunged forward, trying to grab the federal agent by his suit jacket. He is a respected wealth manager. You cannot do this to us. Do you know who we are? Do you know who my family is? We are elite. You are ruining my anniversary dinner. The second agent stepped effortlessly between Tiana and her husband, holding up a firm, warning hand. Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be charged with interfering with a federal arrest. Do not make this worse for yourself. Tiana recoiled, as if she had been physically struck. She looked around the room, her eyes wild and frantic, searching desperately for someone to intervene and save her. She saw the prominent city councilman looking away in sheer embarrassment. She saw the wealthy real estate developers whispering behind their hands. No one was coming to her rescue. Her pristine social standing was actively evaporating into thin air. She turned her furious, manic gaze back to me. You did this, Tiana shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my face. Tears of absolute rage and humiliation streamed down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. You planned this entire thing. You set him up. You are an evil, jealous monster, Sienna. You ruined my life. I did not force him to steal Tiana. I replied, my voice completely calm and devoid of sympathy. I did not force him to lie. I simply handed his financial ledgers to the authorities and let the law handle the rest. You wanted to build a dynasty on stolen money. Now you get to watch it burn. The lead agent began reciting the Miranda rights, his steady, authoritative voice cutting through Tiana's hysterical sobbing. DeAndre kept his head bowed, staring down at his expensive shoes, entirely unable to look anyone in the eye. He was a broken, defeated man. I sat perfectly still in my chair watching the federal agents march my arrogant brother-in-law through the crowded dining room. The sea of wealthy patrons parted to let them through, staring in morbid fascination as the fake crypto billionaire was escorted out the front doors of my restaurant and into the humid Atlanta night. The heavy oak doors of the private dining section swung shut behind them, leaving a suffocating heavy silence in their wake. Tiana collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her arms and sobbing uncontrollably. The glamorous high society wife was now nothing more than the spouse of a convicted felon. Her country club memberships would be revoked. Her invitations to charity galas would be rescinded. Her entire identity had just been forcefully deleted. I turned my attention slowly back to my parents. Desmond and Valerie were staring at me with expressions of sheer, unadulterated terror. They had just witnessed me effortlessly destroy their golden son-in-law with clinical precision. They finally understood that I was not playing a game. I was executing a carefully calculated demolition of their entire fraudulent existence. But I was not finished yet. DeAndre was only the first target on my list. The scam artist had been neutralized, but the true architects of my misery were still sitting right across the table from me. They were the ones who had stolen my college fund. They were the ones who had demanded I mortgage my home tonight. And they were the ones who had dared to threaten my grandmother's legacy. I reached down into my designer handbag and pulled out a sleek black leather folder, placing it deliberately onto the pristine white tablecloth. The soft thud of the folder hitting the table made both of my parents jump nervously in their seats. They stared at the black leather as if it were a live explosive device waiting to detonate. "Now that the trash has been taken out," I said, my voice dropping to a chillingly pleasant tone, "let us talk about the real reason you invited me here tonight, Desmond. Let us talk about your desperate, unquenchable need for cash." Desmond stared at the sleek black leather folder resting on the table as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. The commanding patriarchal aura he had carried for decades had completely evaporated into the humid air of the private dining room. He raised his hands in a frantic, placating gesture, his palms facing outward toward me. "Sienna, you have to believe us." My father pleaded, his voice trembling with a pathetic, desperate urgency. "We had absolutely no idea DeAndre was running a scam. We are completely innocent in all of this. He lied to us just like he lied to everyone else in the congregation. We thought he was a legitimate investment broker. We thought Apex Holdings was a real corporate entity." Valerie nodded vigorously, her emerald green dress rustling as she leaned heavily across the table. The tears streaming down her face were no longer theatrical or manufactured for an audience. They were born of genuine, profound self-preservation. "Your father is right, Sienna," my mother cried, her voice cracking perfectly. "We were entirely manipulated by that man. DeAndre took advantage of our good standing in the community. He used our pristine reputation to build his fraudulent client list. We are victims here too." Tiana lifted her head from her arms, her flawless makeup now running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers. She looked at her parents in sheer disbelief, realizing they were instantly throwing her husband to the wolves to save their own skins. But she was too utterly broken and humiliated to speak a single word in his defense. I let out a sharp, dry laugh that cut right through their pathetic, desperate performance. "Do not insult my intelligence, Desmond," I said, resting my hands calmly on either side of the black folder. "You knew exactly what DeAndre was doing, or at the very least you intentionally chose to look the other way, because his stolen money was funding your lavish lifestyle. You did not care where the cash came from, as long as Tiana could flaunt a new designer bag at the country club, and you could brag about your wealthy son-in-law during Sunday service. You traded your integrity for luxury a long time ago." Desmond wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead, his breathing growing rapid and shallow. "Sienna, please listen to me," he begged, lowering his voice to an urgent, frantic whisper. "We can argue about who knew what later. Right now, we need to focus entirely on damage control. The federal authorities just dragged my son-in-law out of the most exclusive restaurant in Atlanta in handcuffs. The press is going to be all over this by tomorrow morning. Our friends, our church, our entire social circle, they are all going to see this on the local news." He leaned closer, his eyes wide with wild terror. "You have immense power and resources now, Sienna. You have corporate lawyers. You have incredible influence in this city. You need to protect the family name. You have to help us cover this up and spin the narrative before our reputation is permanently destroyed. We will do whatever you want. Just please use your money to fix this. I stared at the man who had stolen my college fund. He was still entirely obsessed with his public image, even while his world actively burned down around him. Protect the family name. I echoed, my tone dripping with absolute chilling contempt. The same family name you told me I was a permanent stain on just 30 minutes ago. The same family name you dragged through the mud when you threw me out to fend for myself so you could throw a party. There is no family name left to protect Desmond. Your legacy is officially a joke. It is a punchline. I reached out and slowly opened the black leather folder I had placed on the table. The crisp white documents inside were perfectly illuminated by the overhead crystal chandelier. I smoothed my hand over the top page, feeling the heavy weight of absolute undeniable victory. You came here tonight to ambush me. I continued, my voice steady and commanding, forcing them to hang on to my every word. You thought you held all the leverage. You brought your pathetic little loan contract and demanded that I mortgage my home to give you $300,000. You claimed it was for a temporary liquidity bridge for DeAndre. But that was just another massive lie, was it not? Valerie stiffened her breath, catching sharply in her throat. I looked directly into her terrified, wide eyes. You did not need that money to secure an international crypto deal, I stated, watching the last remnants of her pride shatter into microscopic pieces. You needed that money to save yourselves from immediate catastrophic bankruptcy. I picked up the first document from the folder, holding it up for them to clearly see the bold financial letterhead. Let us look at the actual reality of your financial situation, I said, reading from the forensic accounting report my team had meticulously compiled over the last month. 8 years ago, you drained my entire college savings to throw Tiana a lavish wedding. But that was not nearly enough, was it? You had to keep up appearances. You had to maintain your expensive country club memberships. You had to drive leased luxury cars you absolutely could not afford. You had to host extravagant charity galas just to prove to the Atlanta elite that you belonged at their table. Tiana let out a soft, muffled sob, burying her face back into her arms. The reality of her entire life being funded by theft and reckless debt was finally sinking in. By last year, your credit was completely tapped out. I continued, my voice echoing with clinical surgical precision across the silent dining room. DeAndre was funneling some stolen church money your way, but it was not enough to cover your massive mountain of compounding debt. So you made the most desperate, foolish financial decision of your entire lives. You took out a predatory high-interest balloon mortgage against your own home. You leveraged the very roof over your heads through a shady shadow lender because no legitimate bank in the state of Georgia would touch your toxic credit scores. Desmond slumped back in his chair, all the color draining entirely from his face. He looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. Valerie covered her mouth with her trembling hands, letting out a muffled, horrified sob. They had spent years desperately hiding this dark secret from their elite social circle, and now I was reading their financial death warrant out loud in the middle of a five-star restaurant. You have been making the minimum interest payments for 12 months. I read aloud, flipping to the second page of the detailed report. But the balloon payment came due 30 days ago. The principal balance of $800,000 was required immediately. You obviously did not have the cash. That is why you invited me here tonight. You needed my $300,000 just to pay the penalty fees and buy yourselves an extension on the foreclosure. I placed the forensic report back into the folder and looked at my parents with absolute disgust. And yet, I said, my tone turning ice cold, causing them both to flinch physically. Even while drowning in a predatory loan, you still had the sheer audacity to sit here tonight and threaten me. You smiled right in my face and told me you were going to bulldoze my late grandmother's historic estate. You threatened to sell her beautiful farm to commercial developers and pave over her rose gardens if I did not hand over my hard-earned money. Valerie reached across the table, her hands shaking violently as she clasped them together in a desperate praying motion. Sienna, please. My mother wept, Her makeup ruined her expensive dress, looking completely out of place on a woman begging for her life. We were desperate. We were terrified of losing our home. We never would have actually hurt your grandmother's property. It was just an empty threat to scare you into helping us. You have to believe me. I do not believe a single word that comes out of your mouth, Valerie, I replied smoothly, without a singular ounce of pity. You would have sold out your own mother's legacy for a designer handbag if the price was right. You tried to use the only thing in this world that I truly love as a weapon to destroy me. I reached into the folder one final time. I pulled out a heavy, legally binding contract. It was thick, pristine, and officially stamped, marked, and notarized by the county clerk. I held it in my hands, feeling the ultimate power of reversing a lifetime of abuse. You threatened to sell Grandma's land, I asked, leaning across the table, narrowing my eyes with lethal, intense focus. You cannot, because you do not have the money to pay your high-priced probate lawyers to maintain that frivolous injunction. The courts will throw your case out by next week. Desmond stared at the thick document in my hands, his jaw trembling. He knew exactly what an official county property deed looked like. But more importantly, I continued delivering the final devastating blow. You do not have a home of your own to return to. I slid the notarized contract directly across the pristine white tablecloth. It came to a stop right in front of my father, resting exactly where he had placed his own fraudulent loan contract just an hour ago. When you defaulted on that predatory balloon mortgage last month, your shadow lender immediately packaged your debt and put it up for sale to commercial collection agencies. I explained, watching his eyes scan the bold legal text on the front page. My corporate acquisition team saw the listing. I bought the debt on your primary residence 3 weeks ago. I own your house. And as of tomorrow morning, I am foreclosing. Desmond stared down at the foreclosure document with completely hollow eyes. The sharp, bold legal text glared back at him, serving as the absolute final nail in his manufactured coffin. His hands trembled so violently that the heavy parchment paper rattled against the pristine white tablecloth. The commanding patriarch, who had spent his entire life dictating the success and failure of his children, was now reduced to a terrified, broken man, clutching the undeniable proof of his own financial ruin. Tiana let out a guttural, devastating wail. She had been staring at the heavy oak doors of the private dining room where the federal agents had just hauled her husband out into the humid Atlanta night. The reality of DeAndre being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle was finally shattering her fragile mind. Her perfect high society marriage was nothing but a criminal illusion. And now, hearing that her parents, the very people who had funded her extravagant lifestyle for decades, were entirely bankrupt and facing immediate eviction, sent her into a spiral of pure hysterical panic. Tiana dropped to her knees right there on the polished marble floor of the onyx room. Her expensive couture gown pooled around her in a wrinkled, messy heap. She was sobbing so hysterically that she could barely draw breath. Her entire identity had been violently ripped away in a matter of minutes. She had no rich husband. She had no country club membership. She had no safety net to fall back on, because the parents she relied on were about to be thrown out onto the street by her own sister. Valerie began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved rapidly under her emerald green silk dress as she clawed at her pearl necklace, gasping for air. The sheer terror of public humiliation, combined with the absolute certainty of her impending homelessness, completely broke her. She pushed her chair back and scrambled around the edge of the large circular table. She threw herself toward me, reaching out with shaking, desperate hands. "Sienna, my baby, please!" Valerie cried out, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. The fake, sophisticated tone she had used all evening was entirely gone. She sounded like a terrified child begging for mercy. "You cannot do this to us. You can't home. Where will we go? How will we survive? We are your family, Sienna. We are your own flesh and blood. Please, my beautiful baby girl, we are family. We can fix this. I promise you we can fix this right now." I looked down at the woman who had birthed me. I felt absolutely zero emotion. There was no pity. There was no lingering anger. There was just a profound, chilling emptiness where a daughter's love should have been. I looked at her ruined makeup, her trembling hands, and her desperate, pleading eyes. I did not move a single inch. I did not extend a hand to comfort her. Family does not starve their own child to feed a fraud. I said, my voice carrying a lethal, icy clarity that stopped her frantic rambling instantly. Family does not steal a hard-earned college fund to pay for an ice sculpture at a wedding. Family does not sit in a five-star restaurant eating expensive seafood while mocking the daughter they forced into poverty. You do not get to use the word family, Valerie. You lost that right the day you watched Desmond drain my bank account and smiled while doing it. Valerie fell back against the edge of the table, her knees buckling slightly. We made mistakes, she sobbed, her hands covering her face as she tried to muffle the ugly sounds of her own despair. We were just trying to protect the family image. We wanted everyone to respect us. We wanted to be an example of success. You wanted to protect the family image. I repeated, my tone dripping with absolute disgust. I stood up from my chair and gestured broadly toward the open double doors leading into the main dining area. The invisible barrier was completely gone. Every single wealthy patron in the restaurant had abandoned their meals to watch the spectacular downfall of the so-called elite family. Take a good look around, Valerie. Look at the politicians, the judges, the real estate developers you desperately tried to impress. They are all watching you right now. The whole city is watching, and they are not seeing black excellence. They are seeing a group of desperate thieves who just got caught. Valerie turned her head slowly, looking out into the main dining room. She saw the judging stares, the whispered conversations, and the complete lack of sympathy on the faces of her peers. The high society elite she worshipped were looking at her with absolute revulsion. Her social standing was not just damaged, it was completely eradicated. She let out a pathetic whimpering sound and shrank back, trying to hide herself from the crushing weight of their judgment. I smoothed the front of my black dress, ensuring my posture was perfectly straight and commanding. The emotional execution was complete, but there was still one final piece of business left to conclude. I turned my attention back to my father, who was still staring blankly at the foreclosure notice. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, deliberate signal to Julian. The general manager stepped forward, instantly moving with his usual polished professional grace. He carried a sleek black leather checkbook presenter, resting smoothly on a small silver tray. He walked directly to our table, completely ignoring the sobbing woman on the floor and the hyperventilating woman leaning against the table. Julian stopped precisely next to Desmond and placed the silver tray gently onto the white tablecloth right next to the empty lobster shells. "Your bill for the evening, sir," Julian announced, his voice perfectly neutral and polite. Desmond blinked, shaking his head, as if trying to wake up from a terrible nightmare. He looked at the black leather presenter and then looked up at me, his eyes wide with desperate confusion. "What is this?" My father stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Sienna, you said you own this restaurant. You said this is your establishment. You cannot possibly expect us to pay for this." "No family discounts tonight," I said, flashing him a cold, unforgiving smile. "You ordered the absolute most expensive items on the menu, Desmond. You ordered 4 butter-poached Maine lobsters. You ordered the vintage wine. You demanded premium service while treating my staff like garbage. I run a highly successful, profitable business. I do not give away free meals to people who are actively trying to destroy my life. The total is $2,800. Pay the bill." Desmond stared at me in sheer horror. The aggressive, commanding patriarch was completely gone. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored charcoal suit jacket with trembling fingers and pulled out his expensive leather wallet. He opened it slowly, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped his credit cards onto the floor. He pulled out a heavy platinum card, the one he always used to casually flex his supposed wealth at the country club. He handed it to Julian without making eye contact. Julian took the card professionally and retrieved a small handheld payment terminal from his jacket pocket. He swiped the heavy platinum card. The machine processed for a brief, agonizing moment before letting out a sharp, angry beeping sound. The screen flashed a bright red warning message. "I apologize, sir," Julian said, his tone devoid of any actual sympathy. "This card has been declined. Insufficient funds." Desmond turned incredibly pale. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. "That is impossible," he muttered frantically, digging into his wallet again. "Run it again. There must be a mistake with the chip reader." "I assure you, sir, the machine is functioning perfectly," Julian replied, standing perfectly still. "The bank has declined the transaction." Tiana let out a loud, bitter laugh from her place on the floor. "Of course it declined," she sobbed hysterically, her voice cracking. "They do not have any money. They are completely broke. They leveraged their entire house just to keep up appearances. They are frauds. We are all frauds." Desmond ignored her, desperately pulling out another credit card. This one was a corporate expense card. He handed it to Julian, his hands visibly shaking. Julian swiped the second card. The machine beeped aggressively again. Another red warning message flashed across the digital screen. "Declined, sir." Julian stated, his voice carrying clearly into the main dining room, ensuring the wealthy onlookers heard every single word of the humiliating transaction. "The account associated with this card has been frozen." My father was hyperventilating now. He realized exactly what was happening. His primary credit accounts were completely maxed out from trying to keep up his fake billionaire lifestyle. His corporate accounts were likely tied to DeAndre's fraudulent firm, which the federal authorities had just completely frozen prior to the arrest. Desmond had absolutely no access to any liquid capital. I was sitting in a five-star restaurant with a $2,800 bill, and he literally did not have the money to pay for it. "DeAndre usually handles the large dining expenses," Desmond whispered, looking frantically around the room as if expecting his arrested son-in-law to miraculously appear and bail him out. "His accounts are holding our excess capital. If you just let me make a phone call." "DeAndre's accounts are currently seized by the federal government. Desmond," I reminded him, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses. "And you do not have any excess capital. You are effectively bankrupt. You are sitting here wearing a suit you cannot afford, eating food you cannot pay for, trying to impress people who are currently laughing at you." Valerie buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the absolute depth of their public humiliation fully settled over the table. The high society peers they had spent decades trying to impress were watching them fail to pay a restaurant bill. The illusion of black excellence they had weaponized against me was completely shattered. They were exposed as nothing more than desperate grifters trying to dine and dash at a luxury establishment. Desmond pulled out a third card, his hands shaking so badly he dropped it onto the tablecloth. He scrambled to pick it up, handing it to Julian with a look of pure, terrified desperation. It was a standard low-limit credit card, likely reserved for emergency gas station purchases. Julian swiped the third card. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable result. The machine processed for 3 long, agonizing seconds. "Beep, beep, beep." "Declined, sir," Julian announced loud enough for the city councilman 2 tables over to hear perfectly clearly. "It appears your credit limit has been vastly exceeded. Do you have another form of payment, perhaps cash?" Desmond stared at his empty wallet. There was no cash. There were no hidden reserves. There was absolutely nothing left. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes filled with a hollow, devastating realization. He had spent his entire life valuing money and status above his own daughter, and now he was sitting in her restaurant entirely stripped of both. The scapegoat had become the sovereign. The golden child was sobbing on the floor. The proud parents were publicly exposed as broke frauds. I had completely, systematically, and ruthlessly dismantled their entire false reality brick by painful brick. I stood tall, looking down at the absolute wreckage of my toxic family. They had finally run out of lies to tell. They had run out of credit to spend. And they had entirely run out of time. I stared down at the 3 of them for one final prolonged moment. The silence in our private dining section was absolute, broken only by the muffled, jagged sounds of Tiana weeping on the marble floor. Desmond sat frozen, his head bowed in ultimate defeat, while Valerie stared blankly at the declined credit cards resting on the silver tray. There was no more fight left in them. The venom, the arrogance, the sheer entitlement had been thoroughly eradicated. I had stripped them down to their very core and exposed the decaying foundation of their entire existence. I turned my attention to Julian, who remained standing at perfect attention, waiting for my final directive. "Julian," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. If they cannot produce a valid form of payment within the next 10 minutes, you are to follow standard protocol. Do not call the police for theft of services. That would be far too easy for them. Instead, hand them the restaurant phone. Let them call their country club friends, their church associates, and their high society peers. Let them beg for the money to cover this bill. And if no one is willing to bail them out, you will have security escort them out the back service entrance. Make sure they leave through the alleyway where the dumpsters are kept. Julian bowed his head, a gesture of absolute respect and understanding. Understood, Ms. Sienna. It will be handled exactly as you have instructed. I did not offer my parents a final goodbye. I did not issue a dramatic parting statement or a tearful declaration of my independence. They did not deserve another single syllable of my time or my energy. I simply turned my back on them. The physical action of pivoting away from the table felt incredibly profound. It was a tangible rejection of the toxic dynamic that had chained me to their expectations for 32 years. I was walking away from the scapegoat role they had forced upon me, and I was never going back. I began my walk toward the main dining room. I moved with slow, deliberate grace, my head held high, my shoulders relaxed. My simple black dress, which they had mocked as a clearance rack rag, swept elegantly against the polished marble floor. The heavy oak double doors were held open for me by the young waiter who had brought me the breadbasket earlier. He gave me a look of profound awe and respect as I passed him. I offered him a warm, genuine smile, a silent acknowledgement of his professionalism amidst the chaos. As I stepped out of the private dining section and into the main restaurant, the atmosphere hit me like a physical wave. The soft jazz music was still playing through the hidden acoustic speakers, but the energy of the room had fundamentally shifted. Just an hour ago, these wealthy patrons of Atlanta had been casting judgmental sideways glances in my direction. They had watched my family berate me, assuming I was the unstable disappointment my mother had loudly proclaimed me to be. They had bought into the illusion of my parents' pristine social standing. Now the entire narrative had been violently flipped upside down. The elite diners were no longer looking at me with pity or disdain. They were looking at me with absolute unadulterated reverence. The whispers that fluttered from table to table were no longer mocking my modest appearance. They were viciously dissecting the humiliating downfall of the family I had just left behind. I walked down the central aisle of the restaurant, passing by the velvet booths and the crystal chandeliers. I could hear the sharp, hushed fragments of their conversations. I heard the prominent city councilman leaning across his table whispering to his wife about how he had always suspected DeAndre was running a fraudulent operation. I heard a wealthy real estate developer scoffing at the fact that Desmond had tried to pay a luxury dinner bill with a maxed-out emergency credit card. I heard the high society socialites dismantling Valerie and Tiana, mocking their fake designer watches, and their desperate, pathetic attempts to maintain relevance. My family had spent their entire lives treating me like absolute garbage just to impress these exact people. They had drained my college fund, leveraged their own home, and enabled a criminal scam artist solely to secure their seat at this elite table. And now the very community they worshipped was actively tearing them apart, tearing their reputation to shreds over plates of expensive seafood. They had become the ultimate cautionary tale of Atlanta high society. I reached the front of the restaurant where the maitre d' was waiting by the host stand. He immediately stepped out from behind his podium, hurrying forward to personally open the heavy glass front doors for me. "Have a wonderful evening, Miss Sienna," he said, his voice filled with extreme deference. "It was an absolute honor to have you with us tonight." "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "Please ensure Julian has whatever support he needs to manage the situation in the back." "Of course, Ms. Sienna. We will handle it with the utmost discretion." I stepped through the heavy glass doors and walked out into the warm, thick Atlanta night air. The sudden transition from the freezing, heavily air-conditioned restaurant to the muggy, humid climate of a Georgia evening was instantly grounding. The oppressive, suffocating tension of the dining room vanished, replaced by the familiar, comforting embrace of the city I had conquered. The ambient noise of downtown traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the low hum of streetlights, It all sounded like a symphony of pure, absolute freedom. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking a deep, cleansing breath. My lungs expanded, filling with oxygen that was no longer tainted by my family and their toxic manipulation. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain completely from my neck, my shoulders, and my spine. I had braced myself for an emotional collapse. I had fully expected to feel a crushing sense of grief or a lingering pang of sorrow over the permanent destruction of my biological family. I had spent years in therapy preparing for the psychological fallout of this exact inevitable confrontation. But as I stood there under the glow of the streetlights, I realized something incredibly beautiful. I felt absolutely nothing for them. There was no guilt tearing at my conscience. There was no heavy burden of biological obligation weighing down my soul. There was no desperate, lingering inner child crying out for the approval of a mother and father who were fundamentally incapable of loving her. All of those fragile, insecure parts of myself had been permanently burned away in the fires of their betrayal. A sleek black luxury SUV pulled smoothly up to the curb, stopping precisely in front of where I was standing. The tinted windows were completely opaque, offering absolute privacy from the outside world. The driver, a trusted security professional I had employed for the past 3 years, immediately stepped out of the vehicle. He walked around to the rear passenger side and opened the heavy armored door for me. "Good evening, Ms. Sienna," he said, giving me a respectful nod. "Is everything all right? Do we need to secure the premises?" "Everything is perfectly fine," I replied, offering him a genuine, relaxed smile. "The trash has already been taken out. We can head home now." I climbed into the spacious back seat of the SUV, settling into the plush leather interior. The driver closed the door securely, sealing me inside a quiet, safe sanctuary. The soundproof cabin blocked out the noise of the city, leaving me in total, absolute peace. I sank back against the headrest, closing my eyes for a brief moment of pure tranquility. Before the driver pulled away from the curb, I opened my eyes and looked out through the dark tinted glass of the window. I had a perfectly clear, unobstructed view of the brightly lit lobby inside the Onyx Room. I watched as the drama I had orchestrated continued to unfold without my physical presence. Through the glass, I saw Desmond pacing frantically near the host stand, his face flushed with panic and extreme humiliation. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, desperately making calls to anyone who might answer. He was calling his golf buddies, his church associates, his fellow country club members, begging them to wire him money to cover the restaurant bill. I watched as he pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen in defeat, as call after call was sent directly to voicemail. Word of DeAndre being arrested had clearly spread through their network faster than a wildfire. No one was going to answer his pleas for help. No one was going to associate themselves with a family actively embroiled in a federal financial crime. I saw Valerie standing behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. Her posture was completely shattered. The arrogant high society matriarch had been reduced to a shivering, terrified shell of a woman. She was looking around the lobby, nervously terrified that one of her wealthy peers might walk out and see her begging for a bailout. She was living her absolute worst nightmare, and she had built the entire trap herself. I did not feel a single ounce of pity watching them scramble. They were experiencing the exact same, desperate, helpless panic they had forced me to endure when they stole my college fund and kicked me out into the world with absolutely nothing. They were finally reaping the exact harvest they had spent decades sowing. The driver shifted the SUV into gear and pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the flowing downtown traffic. The brightly lit facade of the Onyx Room slowly faded into the distance, shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely from my sight. I turned my gaze forward, looking out at the endless stream of red taillights and towering illuminated skyscrapers. For the first time in my 32 years of life, I felt completely, entirely whole. The narrative of the bitter, jealous scapegoat was dead and buried. The heavy, suffocating chains of the black excellence illusion had been forcefully shattered. I had reclaimed my narrative, my power, and my grandmother's legacy. I had protected my empire and excised the cancerous tumors from my life with surgical precision. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my phone. I had missed messages from my executive team, confirming that the foreclosure proceedings on my parents' house had officially been filed. I had a message from my legal department confirming that the federal authorities had successfully processed DeAndre into custody. Every single piece of the operation had been executed flawlessly. I locked my phone and dropped it back into my bag. I did not need to check on them anymore. I did not need to monitor their collapse. They were no longer my problem. They were simply strangers who had made terrible choices and were now facing the inevitable devastating consequences. I leaned my head against the cool leather window, feeling the gentle vibration of the vehicle moving through the city. I thought about the vast, beautiful expanse of the Macon property waiting for me. I thought about the historic Victorian farmhouse standing proudly amidst the lush Georgia fields, untouched by the commercial bulldozers my parents had threatened to unleash. I had secured my sanctuary and I had secured my future. I took one final deep breath, letting the last microscopic trace of my family exit my body. I was Sienna. I was a self-made titan. I was the master of my own universe. And as the sleek black SUV carried me forward into the warm, embracing night, I knew with absolute undeniable certainty that I was finally heading home. 6 months passed since that humid night in Atlanta. The implosion of my family played out exactly as I knew it would, echoing through the city like a cautionary tale. DeAndre did not get his 30 days to restructure his fraudulent portfolios. He did not get a single chance to make anyone whole. He was indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and the financial exploitation of seniors. The sheer volume of irrefutable evidence my forensic accountants handed over to the federal authorities meant he never even stood a chance at a highly publicized trial. He took a miserable plea deal just to avoid spending the rest of his natural life behind bars. Today, he is serving a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary stripped of his tailored suits and his fake diamond watches. His crypto wealth management empire was reduced to nothing but cardboard boxes of seized financial records sitting in a government evidence locker gathering dust. Tiana suffered a downfall that was arguably even more devastating because she actually had to stay in Atlanta and face the exact people she had spent years looking down upon. Without DeAndre's stolen money to fund her lavish lifestyle, her high society illusion crumbled instantly. She tried to hire top defense attorneys to keep her husband out of prison, but legal representation requires actual liquid capital. Tiana was forced to systematically liquidate her entire life. Her custom couture gowns, her limited edition handbags, and her collection of expensive jewelry were all sold off at a fraction of their value to pay mounting legal fees. Today, the former golden child of the family is working as a front desk receptionist at a low-end discount retail store in the suburbs. She clocks in for hourly shifts wearing cheap polyester uniforms, far away from the country clubs and charity galas she used to dominate. The wealthy women in her elite circle blocked her phone number the very morning after DeAndre was arrested. She is completely invisible to the world she once worshipped, a forgotten ghost, haunting a discount checkout lane. As for Desmond and Valerie, their reckoning was swift and absolutely merciless. True to my word, I executed the foreclosure on their primary residence the exact morning following our disastrous dinner. They were formally evicted from their luxurious home, leaving with nothing but whatever belongings they could fit into a small moving truck. They tried desperately to reach out to their church congregation and their wealthy friends for financial salvation. But no one answered their calls. The horrific revelation that they had actively enabled a man who stole the retirement funds of elderly church members made them absolute social pariahs. They were entirely shunned, cast out of their social circles with profound unified disgust. They now live in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Desmond works the night shift at a hardware store, while Valerie spends her days staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper of her tiny living room. They have absolutely no status, no wealth, and no legacy. They traded their own flesh and blood for the illusion of power, and now they have nothing but the suffocating weight of their own consequences. While they sit in the ruins of their manufactured lives, I am standing in the warm morning sun surrounded by 40 acres of lush, beautiful Georgia farmland. The Macon property looks more radiant than ever. The beautiful historic Victorian farmhouse still stands proudly in the center of the estate, its wraparound porch freshly painted and its foundations strongly reinforced. My grandmother's delicate rose gardens are blooming vibrantly, filling the crisp, fresh air with a sweet, familiar fragrance. I did not sell a single inch of this sacred ground to commercial developers. I did not pave over my family history for a quick corporate profit. Instead, I am holding a silver-plated shovel driving it deep into the rich, dark soil. Today, we are breaking ground on the Harrington Culinary Academy. It is a fully funded, state-of-the-art educational campus designed specifically for underprivileged youth of color. We are providing free professional culinary training, advanced business management courses, and crucial financial literacy programs to teenagers who have the incredible drive to succeed but deeply lack the resources to start. I am using my corporate empire to build a tangible, lasting legacy of actual empowerment. I am giving these kids the exact support, validation, and guidance that my parents deliberately stole from me. Standing here, looking out over the rolling green fields, I finally understand the ultimate truth about our culture and our society. True Black excellence has absolutely nothing to do with buying fake luxury watches to impress strangers. It is not found in relentlessly keeping up appearances or staging lavish 500-guest weddings with stolen college funds. It is not about projecting a flawless, wealthy image while your moral foundation rots away from the inside out. True excellence is deeply rooted in unwavering, unshakable integrity. It is found in the quiet, grueling hours of hard work when absolutely no one is watching to applaud you. It is about building real, tangible value and using your hard-earned success to actively uplift the people around you rather than stepping on their necks to elevate yourself. Most importantly, it is about knowing your absolute worth and refusing to let anyone diminish your bright light. I walked directly through the blazing fire of my family's betrayal, and I did not just survive the violent flames. I used the intense heat of their profound cruelty to forge an unstoppable empire. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and your future? Let me know your story in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of surviving and thriving.